The first thing he felt was the dark, familiar, a world of shadow. Only this time it was out of focus like sight tried to sharpen through fog. Damon's eyes opened. His breath was shallow, his throat dry. A dim room, corners lost to gloom, and a ceiling he knew too well. The infirmary. For once, normal vision and shadow sense overlapped, both clear at the same time. Strange, but not worth dwelling on. He'd woken here often enough after being worked over. He tried to move. Pain answered from joints, muscles, bone. He rasped. A faint prompt hovered in his view. HP. 40/50ths. He lifted a shaky hand toward it. Still alive, he muttered. No relief. No tears. Just the same old fact. He pushed himself upright and paused. Someone sat beside his bed. Not a healer. A black-haired girl with white streaks. Beastkin ears twitching in sleep. Leona Veilfire. Why is she here? On the bedside table lay his pager, and Croft, the raven, perched with eyes closed. His stomach growled hard. He froze. If shadow hunger had crested, he'd be in trouble. He searched for his shadow. It lay where the lantern cast it, docile, ordinary. He let himself breathe. He called up his panel. HP, 40/50ths. Mana, 90/90. Strength, 9. Agility, 17. Speed, 35. Endurance, 10. Class, Shadow, 100. Shadow hunger, 2%. Shadow level, 2%. Condition, shadow full. Attribute, Umbra. Skills, 5x. Remorseless shadow perception. Locked. Good, he exhaled. Manageable. Which raised the next question. How long was I out? The soreness said the injuries had been bad. He whispered to his shadow. How long? It peeled up from the floor, formed 2 lifted fingers. 2 days. Anvil's commission should be ready. He grabbed the pager. Missed calls. Messages. Carl, probably the commission, then a notification that made his gut drop. The Healing Institute. Luna. His hands shook as he dialed. No answer. Again. Nothing. Sweat beaded. No. Luna. He lurched off the bed. His legs gave. He hit the floor with a thud. Croft's eyes snapped open. Demon. Demon. Evil. Leona jerked awake, aura flaring gold, battle-ready at the word demon. Her gaze found Damon on the floor. The fight drained from her face. Tears shimmered. Damon, you're okay. I was so worried. Ow, stop. He winced under her sudden hug. She released him, flustered. Sorry, I was just happy you're. Croft kept screeching. Demon awake. Shut up, bird. Damon snapped. It's Damon. 2 different words. Croft launched, pecked his hair. Evil demon. He swatted it back to the table. He tried to stand again, but Leona was quicker. She hauled him up and eased him to the bed. Let go. My pager. He reached. She snatched it first. Rest, she said firm. Even the strongest need to recover. His face stayed cold. His mind was already racing to Valyrian. He rose again. Stay, she insisted, pressing him back, golden eyes bright with worry. Get off me. Let me go. No, she said, voice shaking but steady. Calm down first. As your friend, I can't let you run like this. His teeth clenched. Get off me, you furry bitch. We aren't friends. She flinched. Her ears drooped. When she spoke, it was a whisper. I don't care. I won't let go until you calm down. Damon leveled an icy glare at Leona. She didn't flinch, both hands locked around his pager. Stay put, or I'll break this, she said, voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. Are you threatening me? He asked. No, she said, shaking her head. I wouldn't threaten a friend. I'm telling you to calm down. She noticed how often the pager buzzed over the last 2 days, and how he reacted to it. Whatever shook him was tied to that device. He eased back onto the bed. Leona exhaled and passed the pager over. This time he stayed put, forcing his breathing to slow. He unlocked the screen, scrolled. Carl's messages as expected, then one from the Healing Institute. His breath caught. It wasn't disaster. A billing notice for Luna's medication and supplies. Routine. She was fine. Air left him in a rush. He bowed his head into his hands. I nearly lost it over nothing. But he knew why. If anything happened to Luna, there'd be nothing left. Leona sat quietly, watching. Her presence was steadying. After a moment, he glanced at her. Head slightly bowed, ears twitching. She'd been right. He needed to cool down. He still didn't know why she cared. "Thank you," he said. "That's racist," she replied evenly. He blinked. "What? Calling me a furry? That's racist." His jaw tightened. He hadn't meant it that way. "My apologies. I didn't intend to offend. It's fine. I forgive you." She hesitated, voice lowering. "I thought you were going to die. The healers barely saved you both. Why push that far?" He said nothing. Was winning really that important? Or was it just the money? No amount of money is worth your life. Her words bit, and he hid it behind ice. "Shut up. You don't know me. And yes, that much money is worth dying for. I don't expect you to understand." "I see," she murmured, hurt flickering in her eyes. She looked to the window. It's been 2 days. Xander Ravenscroft woke up yesterday. He was out about a day and a half. He came here to pay your price. You were out, so I gave him your pager number. "I don't care, as long as he paid," Damon said. He did. Evangeline and Sylvia visited too, left 2 or 3 hours ago. She handed him a small box. "They made you a healing ointment." He checked his war bank. 500,000 zenny from Xander. Relief washed through him. He took the box. "Sure." "Oh," she pointed at the bedside drawer. "I brought you fresh uniforms. The head maid let me in. Your dagger's there too. I sent the broken one to admin to fix or replace." He drew out the familiar blade, the one from his quick hand days, stared a beat, then shut the drawer. "Why did you stay?" "Because I'm your friend," she said, warm and simple. His stomach turned at the word. "Thanks for everything, but I'm fine now. I didn't need you here. I've been—" His stomach growled loudly. Leona clasped her hands to hide a smile. "I didn't know when you'd wake. Hold on. I'll get food." She slipped out and returned a few minutes later with a tray. The room was empty. His white robe lay on the bed. The window stood open, curtains breathing in the night air. Damon and Croft were gone. Leona stopped, staring at the space he'd left behind. She set the tray down, walked to the window, and swallowed hard as her eyes shimmered. "He just left, huh?" she whispered, a tear slipping free. "I really am just trying to be your friend."
Hey everyone, Firescale Audiobooks here. If there's a novel you'd love to hear more of, you can support us on Patreon or Ko-fi. Depending on your tier, I'll make extra parts just for the stories you're most excited about. Usually I can only upload 4 to 5 parts of each novel, but with your support, we can go beyond that. And of course, don't forget to hit subscribe. It helps more than you know.
Damon's muscles felt sore, his every step accompanied by a mild but persistent ache. The discomfort, however, wasn't what truly troubled him. There was a sting in his heart, deeper and far more elusive, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Leona Veilfire. I just don't get that beastkin girl. He couldn't comprehend her attachment to him. Their interactions had been minimal, yet she'd boldly declared herself his friend. Damon was aware that beastkin were often more direct than humans, especially regarding relationships, but this didn't sit well with him. Opening up to someone was never his style, and he instinctively searched for reasons to doubt her intentions. Caw-caw, the sharp cry of a raven broke his thoughts, pulling him back to the present. He stopped walking and narrowed his eyes at the familiar sound. Croft was still with him, circling above before landing on his shoulder. The raven's persistence baffled him, especially since it supposedly held a grudge against him. Without hesitation, Damon reached out, grabbing the bird with lightning speed. Croft squawked in protest, flapping wildly as Damon gripped it with one arm and used his other hand to clamp its beak shut. His cold gaze locked onto the raven's beady eyes. "Sylvia said you're intelligent enough to understand me," Damon began, his voice low and cutting. "Honestly, I don't care if you are. Just know this. If you intend to follow me, then I suggest you stay quiet or die." The raven stopped struggling, its dark eyes reflecting Damon's stern expression. Damon continued, his tone unwavering. "I'll keep you if you're useful. Perform well enough, and I'll reward you with meat. So make your choice, usefulness or death." After a tense moment, Damon released the bird. Croft flapped its wings and took off into the night sky, vanishing into the shadows. Damon watched it go, his face devoid of emotion. I suppose it's just a stupid bird. Sylvia had mentioned a thing or two about ravens and their supposed intelligence. She had even offered tips on training one, volunteering to help him if needed. Damon wasn't convinced, but had to admit the bird seemed to understand him to some extent. Still, he resolved that if it proved useless, he'd get rid of it without hesitation. He took another step forward, but suddenly clutched his head, wincing as his shadow perception spread uncontrollably outward. He rubbed his temple, closing his eyes to rein in the overwhelming sensation. Still haven't learned to control it, he muttered, frustrated. I'm gonna need a new blindfold. His previous blindfold had been destroyed during the duel with Xander Ravenscroft, forcing him to rely solely on the shadows to navigate. For now, he kept his eyes shut, the world around him painted in the dark, shifting outlines revealed by shadows. A faint ripple moved within the blackness, a familiar presence. Damon smiled faintly. I suppose you're far more reliable than that stupid bird, he murmured to his mysterious companion. He continued walking, his destination clear. The waterways leading out of the academy stretched before him, a quiet, secluded path. He retrieved his pager, sending a message to Carls with precise instructions to meet him. Minutes later, Damon exited the academy grounds, stepping into the dense forest that bordered it. The shadows welcomed him like an old friend, guiding him toward Aether's sanctuary. Walking silently through the woods, Damon moved with caution, his senses attuned to the faintest shifts within the radius of his shadow perception. The forest was quiet, save for the rustling of leaves and the occasional snap of a twig underfoot. A sudden ripple in the shadows caught his attention. A raven landed on the ground ahead of him, something glinting in its beak. Damon stopped, narrowing his eyes as the bird hopped toward him, flapping its wings for emphasis. In its beak was a round cufflink, the gold catching the faint light filtering through the trees. Damon bent down, carefully picking up the object. His eyes narrowed as he examined it. A family crest embossed in gold. The design sparked a sense of familiarity, and his mind raced to place it. The raven cawed loudly, flapping its wings again. Caw, caw. Marcus caw. Damon's eyes snapped open in shock. No way. This actually belongs to Marcus Fayjoy. That's the Fayjoy family crest. He glanced down at the raven, his gaze sharp. Where did you get this? The bird tilted its head, then looked away, hopping onto his shoulder with a flutter. Caw, caw. Useful, demon, useful. Damon froze, a mix of surprise and suspicion washing over him. This bird, it's far more intelligent than I realized. How long has it been watching me? Could it still hold a grudge? He met the raven's beady eyes, his expression darkening. But in the end, it's just an animal, and animals can be tamed. Discover more stories at Empire. A cold smile crept across Damon's lips. Well, Croft, it seems you and I got off on the wrong wing. I apologize for earlier. Why don't we start over? You've done very well bringing this to me. How about I buy you some fresh meat when we get to town? The raven cocked its head, seemingly pleased. Caw-caw meat. Closing his eyes, Damon allowed his thoughts to wander. I don't know what's happened in the 2 days I was unconscious, but Tobias is surely still under house arrest. If his name hasn't been cleared, the pressure must be mounting. Tomorrow, I'll gather information and then kill him. His mind shifted to Lilith Astronova. He didn't know how much she'd uncovered in the past 2 days or whether any of it pointed to him. I'll need to tread carefully. But thanks to Croft, I've just thought of a perfect way to kill Tobias Morgan. First, however, he needed to retrieve weapons from Anvil. 2 daggers, a hook, a collapsible bow, a quiver of arrows forged from Kerr's store. Perhaps he could acquire some Atrax to craft a hallucinogenic poison. A color hair dye would also be useful for his plans. Damon clenched his fists, his lips curling into a predatory smile. He could almost taste the despair that would soon paint Tobias's face. With renewed determination, he stepped deeper into the forest, the shadows around him growing thicker as he made his way toward town. It wasn't long before Damon stood at the edge of the forest, his presence cloaked in the shadows of the towering trees. Though his eyes remained closed, He didn't need them to perceive the bustling town that lay ahead. His shadow perception extended outward, covering an entire 2-kilometer radius. Through this invisible network of shadows, he could sense the town's activity. The shadows of humans, elves, beast-kin, dwarves, fae, noble spirits, and countless other races moved like a vivid kaleidoscope of motion and form. Aether's sanctuary was a melting pot of life, a bustling hub of diversity, and the sheer amount of information flooding his senses made his head throb. Despite the discomfort, Damon endured it. This was a test of his abilities. After a few minutes, a familiar shadow flickered into focus. A young man with brown hair and blue eyes, someone Damon could only describe as shady. Carl's. He was the one Damon had been waiting for. He'll be here soon, Damon thought, pulling his senses back to a manageable 10-meter radius. His hand brushed against his academy uniform, and he frowned. I can't go into town dressed like this. The uniform was far too conspicuous, especially with the student council's enforcers always on the lookout for wayward first years. Carl's was bringing him a cloak and a new blindfold, necessities if he wanted to move unnoticed. Damon opened his eyes, his gaze drifting to a distant hill bathed in pale moonlight. His expression twisted into something resembling a smile, though it lacked warmth. On that hill lay the grave of a man who had once shown him kindness. Kindness Damon had repaid with a claw to the heart. Kindness is reciprocal. That's what he believed, Damon thought bitterly. The weight of his actions pressed against him, a constant reminder of the choices he had made. He was fully aware of his hypocrisy. He had killed an innocent man, and soon he planned to take another innocent life. Discover more content at Empire. He bit his lip, his fists clenching at his sides. Truth be told, I'm no different from the people I despise. I'm just a hypocrite. His dark eyes lingered on the hill, but he didn't dare approach it. The memories were too raw, the guilt too sharp. I've made my choice, he reminded himself. I chose survival, no matter the cost. Morality be damned. Even so, a small part of him, the part he tried so hard to bury, wished Carmen Vale had been right about him. That small voice of conscience whispered faintly, reminding him of the man he could never aspire to be. But Damon silenced it. He couldn't afford such weakness, not now. Turning his back on the hill, he waited for Carl's, the weight of his decisions heavy on his shoulders as he stared into the darkness ahead. The soft rustling of footsteps on grass broke Damon out of his reverie. He turned to find a familiar figure stepping out from the shadows. Carl's, the self-proclaimed information broker. Carl's grinned, tossing a carefully wrapped bundle onto the ground. I couldn't reach you for 2 days. I was sure you'd bitten the dust. Damon's expression remained neutral. It wasn't surprising. Death was hardly an anomaly at Aether Academy. What gave you that impression? Damon asked, his tone flat. Carl's chuckled, brushing his hair back. I suppose you're not that easy to kill after all. Well, no matter. Anvil finished your stuff, and he's eager to show you what he's done. Damon nodded, kneeling to pick up the cloak from the bundle. He dusted it off meticulously, inspecting every inch of the fabric. With a flick of his wrist, he shook it out, causing a smaller black piece of cloth to fall to the ground. Carl sighed. You're always so cautious. Relax. I swear I didn't tamper with anything. No traps, no flay powder, nothing. You're my best client. Can't afford to lose you. Ignoring him, Damon slipped on the cloak, wincing slightly as his sore muscles protested the movement. He bent to pick up the smaller black fabric, turning it over in his hands before glancing at Carl's. Let's go, he said curtly. Carl shrugged, eyeing the fabric in Damon's hands. Sure, but what's that for? Without a word, Damon unfolded the cloth and wrapped it around his eyes, covering his vision entirely. This, Damon said, his voice steady, is what it's for. Carl's frowned, baffled. How exactly do you plan to see with a blindfold on? Damon didn't dignify the question with a response. Instead, he simply turned and began walking, his movements fluid and confident despite the darkness over his eyes. Carl's hesitated, watching him for a moment before hurrying to catch up. You're full of surprises, you know that. The town of Aether's sanctuary came into view as they emerged from the forest. Even at night, it buzzed with life. The streets were alive with activity, vendors calling out to passers-by, and a mingling of countless voices creating a constant hum of noise. The town's unique position near Aether Academy made it a diplomatic neutral zone. Though it technically fell under the jurisdiction of the Valtheran Empire, no single nation's laws applied here. International law governed the area, enforced by the Academy and an alliance of nations. This status made Aether's sanctuary a haven for many, its streets teeming with people from all walks of life. Damon walked with his hood drawn low, his blindfold adding another layer of anonymity. Yet, despite the covering over his eyes, he navigated the bustling streets with ease. His shadow perception was active, allowing him to sense every movement around him. Each shadow was unique, some darker, denser, and more powerful than others. It was this ability that made him pause. His attention shifted to a shadow near a wall, where something caught his interest. A poster. Damon extended his perception, and, as the details of the poster became clear, his heart sank. Carl stopped beside him, his face a mix of anger and sadness. "So you knew the old man, huh?" "Figures. He was a nice guy, not a single person in town who didn't like him." Damon clenched his jaw, his eyes hidden behind the blindfold as he stared at the poster through his shadows. It bore Carmen Vale's name and details of his supposed attack by a monster. There was even a bounty for information about the creature. Feigning ignorance, Damon whispered, "Doublage, what happened to him?" Carl sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Word is he was attacked while camping out in the woods. Monster got him, killed him, and dragged him off, or maybe he's still alive somewhere. Doesn't matter. Everyone in town's already accepted he's dead." Carl's voice grew heavy with emotion. "He was a good man, that old geezer. That's why the whole town's out for revenge. When we find that monster, it's going to pay." Damon's fist clenched at his sides, his stomach twisting in guilt. He hadn't expected Carmen Vale to be so beloved. The old man's kindness had extended far beyond what Damon had realized. Does being kind really inspire this much loyalty? Damon thought, his head bowing slightly. He couldn't let anyone know the truth. The kind hunter hadn't been killed by a monster. Damon had taken his life, and now he was trapped in the web of his own actions. Carl's exhaled deeply, breaking the silence. "Well, whatever. The authorities are on it. Your Academy's student council president even volunteered to help. Word is she might know something about the monster." Damon froze. His face went pale beneath the blindfold. "Lilith, Astronova," he whispered, his voice barely audible. If Lilith was involved, it meant danger was much closer than he had anticipated. If she found out the truth, Damon bit his lip, his mind racing. He was running out of options, and if he was exposed, there would be nowhere to hide. For the remainder of their journey to Anvil's workshop, Damon bombarded Carls with questions about Carmen Vale. Usually, Carls was tight-lipped when it came to giving out information for free, especially without proper compensation. But when it came to the kind hunter, Carls let his guard down, unwittingly spilling everything Damon wanted to know. By the time they reached the workshop, Damon had pieced together every detail he could about the man. He learned about Carmen's modest residence, the whispered rumors of his backstory, and even information about his daughter. Carls, being an experienced info broker, had dug up details about her magical attribute and upbringing, painting a vivid picture of the life the hunter had left behind. Damon felt an uncomfortable heaviness in his chest as he processed it all. Despite his resolve to steel himself against his guilt, his heart swelled with conflicting emotions. So he was her last surviving relative. Damon thought bitterly, his lips tightening. The weight of the revelation pressed down on him. He had taken more than just a life. He'd ripped apart what little family the girl had left. He bit his lip, his thoughts spiraling. How did he manage to stay so optimistic despite everything he'd been through, despite all he'd lost? The question gnawed at Damon, but he knew it was one he'd never be able to answer. Not after what he'd done. Carmen's story, as tragic as it was, only highlighted Damon's own flaws. Compared to the hunter's quiet strength, Damon's brooding seemed almost pathetic, an overindulgence in self-pity. He pulled his hood lower over his head, the blindfold already concealing his eyes. He couldn't see his own expression, but he wondered what kind of face he was making. Probably something pitiful, he thought with a grim twist of his mouth. They soon reached Anvil's secluded workshop. As they approached the door, a raven descended from the sky and landed gracefully on Damon's shoulder. "Shoo! Damn bird!" Carls exclaimed, stepping closer and waving his hands to scare it off. Before Carls could do anything else, Damon caught his hand, his tone calm but firm. "He's with me." The raven, Croft, let out an annoyed caw, glaring at Carls with its beady black eyes. Carl stared at Damon, confused. Didn't peg you as the type to keep a pet, especially something as ominous as a crow. Damon shook his head as they entered the workshop. "He's a raven, not a crow." The shop looked the same as it had the last time Damon visited, except this time the usual clanging of metal against hot or was absent. Anvil wasn't hammering away at his forge. The quiet felt out of place. "Where's the old man?" Damon asked, his voice echoing slightly in the empty workshop. Carls, more intrigued by Croft than the apparent absence of their host, cupped his hands around his mouth and called out, "Hey, Anvil, you in there, or did you finally keel over? I brought Damon to pick up his stuff." A door creaked open, and Anvil stepped out, wiping his hands on a soot-stained cloth. He wore his usual fireproof apron, his rugged face partially hidden behind a thick, graying beard. His sharp eyes scanned Damon, taking note of the blindfold and the raven perched on his shoulder. "The hell happened to you?" Anvil asked, his tone a mix of curiosity and concern. "What's with the blindfold and the bird?" "I'm not blind, if that's what you're thinking," Damon replied. "And as for my absence, let's just say I had a little scuffle with a classmate." Anvil chuckled deeply. "Looks like more than a little scuffle if you were out of commission long enough to ignore calls and messages." Carl smirked, leaning casually against a nearby table. "At least tell me you won." "I did," Damon replied flatly. Anvil scratched his beard thoughtfully. "Your weapons are done. Did you bring back the ones I lent you?" Damon froze for a moment before realizing his mistake. "All right, I forgot to bring them. I rushed here as soon as I woke up." Anvil threw his head back and laughed heartily. "Huh, that's a relief. For a moment, I thought you'd managed to break them. Glad to hear my craftsmanship is still as sturdy as ever." "They were excellent weapons," Damon admitted, bowing his head slightly. Anvil grinned. "If you thought those were good, wait until you see what I've made for you this time. Might have gone a little overboard." Damon nodded, watching as Anvil moved to a large chest behind the counter. The old smith hefted it with ease, gesturing for Damon and Carls to follow him to a back room. Croft took flight, landing on a beam above as they entered the room. Damon noted with some relief that the bird remained silent. The room itself bore the marks of countless tests and experiments. A battered training dummy stood in one corner, its charred and patched form a testament to the abuse it had endured over time. Anvil placed the chest on the ground and opened it with a flourish, his eyes gleaming with excitement. "You wanted a bow, daggers forged from magicite, hollow arrows made from cursed ore, and a grappling hook, right?" Damon nodded. "That's correct." Anvil leaned forward, his excitement palpable. "The bow was the easiest to make. I designed a collapsible metal bow with moving parts. You can fold it into a compact form and carry it under your uniform." He reached into the chest and pulled out a silver, cross-shaped contraption. At first glance, it seemed unimpressive, more like a complicated ornament than a weapon. "What, not impressed?" Anvil teased, shaking the bow lightly. With a metallic snap, it expanded, transforming into a full-sized bow. Damon's expression shifted to surprise. "Huh." Carls blinked, equally stunned. That thing was actually a bow. Anvil handed it to Damon, who took it carefully. He tested its balance, stretched the bowstring, and felt its seamless tension. A small button in the center caught his eye. Pressing it, he watched as the bow folded neatly back into its compact form. "This is incredible," Damon said, genuinely impressed. "Read chapters at Empire." Carls clapped a hand on Damon's shoulder, grinning. "Told you, Anvil's the best smith in town." Damon turned back to the bow, feeling the faint magical energy coursing through it. The magicite in the metal, Its magic conductivity is remarkable. Anvil laughed. Haven't seen anything yet. He grew more serious as he reached into the chest again. The hollow arrows were trickier. Ingenious design, really. The hollow tips make them fly faster and hit harder. He paused, frowning. But the cursed or is dangerous. Prolonged exposure can cause complications. In the worst cases, even death. Damon's grip on the bow tightened. I'll manage. As Damon inspected the hollow arrows, Anvil leaned back with a shrug. Well, you're a funeral. Anvil's gaze shifted to Damon, his tone turning serious. What exactly are the side effects of cursed or... Damon could tell why the old smith was concerned. Cursed or wasn't named that way for nothing. It was dangerous in more ways than one. Cursed or is known to disrupt or outright kill magic, Damon explained. It can sever the flow of mana, which is its positive effect. But the downsides? Hallucinations, mental instability, sickness, physical weakness, and it attracts monsters. That's just the start. Anvil nodded grimly, pulling one of the arrows from a chest. The arrowhead was oddly shaped, more like a hollow shell than a sharp tip. He detached the shell casing, revealing the full arrowhead beneath, a black, circular design with a faint, ominous glint. He tossed the arrow to Damon, who caught it effortlessly, noting its peculiar weight. I designed these shells to cover the arrowheads, so you can carry them safely, Anvil explained, holding up one of the small casings. The cursed or is in the exposed part of the tip. With this covering, the danger is minimized. Though let's be honest, no sane person would carry cursed or willingly. Carls, standing off to the side, nodded in agreement. The old man's right. Even seasoned fighters who've reached their first-class advancement, people with significant resistance to magical effects, hesitate to use cursed or, and those who do, let's just say it doesn't end well. He glanced at the arrows warily, his expression grim. Weapons made of cursed or have ruined their wielders. Like the cursed sword that drove a knight to slaughter his entire family, or the hammer that attracted a monster stampede. This stuff brings nothing but misfortune. Damon acknowledged their concerns, but remained resolute. I understand the risks, but as long as the arrowheads are covered with these shells, I should be fine, right? Anvil nodded. Yes, my shells are as foolproof as you can get with cursed, or just don't get careless. Carls crossed his arms, shaking his head slightly. Even so, be wary. Drawing misfortune is never worth it. Damon smirked, slotting the arrow into his new bow and pulling back the string to test it. The faint hum of magic coursed through the weapon, a testament to its craftsmanship. Misfortune, he said, his voice calm but menacing, is exactly what I intend to bring to all my enemies. Damon drew the bowstring, his fingers steady, and released the arrow. The projectile sliced through the air, emitting a faint whistle before it tore straight through the target. Carl's eyes widened in disbelief. It went through the target. A small smirk crept across Damon's face. As I expected, hollow arrows travel faster and pierce deeper. But they have their flaws, too. He glanced at the puncture in the target, almost impressed. Explore new worlds at Empire. Where was this when I was shooting ravens? Anvil stepped closer, his gaze fixed on the small hole left by the arrow. He glanced at Damon, his expression curious. How do you even see under that blindfold? Damon remained silent, and Anvil let out a hearty laugh. Flawless, isn't it? With this, you can punch a clean hole through a human, no problem. The blacksmith stroked his beard thoughtfully. Although, the hollow tips make the aerodynamics a bit tricky, and the arrow does make some noise, though I managed to tone it down to a faint whistle. Anvil's grin widened as he looked back at Damon. I called him the Whistling Death. Damon nodded approvingly. A fitting name. By the time someone hears the whistle, it'll already be too late. And thanks to the shells you made to cover the tips, I can carry them safely under my jacket, along with the bow. Carls returned from retrieving the arrow, his face pale. He held it out to Damon with obvious reluctance, eager to be rid of it. I can't imagine why anyone would want this as a weapon, but I pity anyone who gets shot by it. Cursed or also slows healing. Anvil let out a booming laugh. You're such a wuss. Be more like your daredevil friend over here. Carls glared at him, his expression deadpan. If I were more like him, I'd probably be dead already. Anvil shook his head, chuckling at Carl's discomfort. Turning back to Damon, he said, I also made a custom quiver that pins to your uniform jacket, one on each side for easy access to your arrows. Damon nodded, genuinely appreciative of the blacksmith's effort. The man clearly went above and beyond. Next, Anvil pulled out a belt, tossing it to Damon. He caught it effortlessly and strapped it on, noticing 2 daggers sheathed at the back in a cross formation. The placement was perfect, just within reach. Curious, he drew the daggers. They gleamed faintly in the dim light, their reddish metal catching his attention. The blades were wider than usual, with a button-like mechanism on the pommel. Magicite daggers, Anvil explained with pride. They absorb magic, making them effective against spellcasters. The grip contains a compartment for poison. Just press the button with your thumb, and whatever poison you load in there will spill out. Damon examined the daggers, a small grin forming on his lips. An insidious weapon, indeed. Anvil nodded, his grin matching Damon's. My only regret is that you're too poor to afford rune inscriptions. With those, these daggers could have been killer artifacts. Damon twirled the daggers expertly, testing their balance and weight. That would have killed my wallet too. Despite the jest, he couldn't help but be pleased with the craftsmanship. The daggers felt natural in his hands as he sparred with the air, their weight perfect for swift and lethal strikes. He glanced at his shadow briefly, wondering what it thought of the new weapons. But it remained dormant for now, indifferent to the people around. I'll have to get its opinion later. Satisfied, he sheathed the daggers, noting how well they fit beneath his uniform jacket. Draping his cloak over his shoulders, he looked back at Anvil. Now, what about the grappling hook? Anvil's grin turned mischievous as he reached into the chest. Yeah, you're gonna love this one the most. With a flourish, he pulled out an object, and Damon's brow furrowed. He tugged his blindfold down slightly to confirm what he was seeing. This isn't a grappling hook. Damon's surprise was warranted. He pulled off his blindfold just to be sure his shadow perception wasn't deceiving him. Since they'd entered the room, he had made a conscious effort not to use his shadow perception to peer into the chest. But now, he regretted his restraint. Anvil wasn't holding a grappling hook as Damon had expected. Instead, he was holding what appeared to be a pair of metal braces designed to be worn on the wrists, extending from the wrist to the elbow. The old blacksmith grinned, clearly pleased with himself. Behold my masterpiece. Damon frowned as Anvil approached him, the braces in hand. I think you might have mixed up my order with someone else's. Anvil chuckled heartily. I had no idea you had a sense of humor under that gloomy expression. The blacksmith flipped one of the braces over, revealing a mechanism hidden on the underside. Damon's eyes widened as he took in the intricate design. It looked like a series of pulleys with a bundle of thin strings wrapped around one of them. He could have sworn there were springs embedded within the mechanism, but even with his shadow perception, the inner workings remained somewhat unclear. At the tip of the brace, a small metal blade peeked out slightly. What even is this? Damon asked, his curiosity tinged with skepticism. Anvil's grin widened as he launched into an explanation. This is a hook, but it's much more than just for climbing. You wanted something compact that could fit under your uniform, so I designed these. One for each arm. He pointed to the thin blade at the tip of the brace. I used what was left of the magicite to craft the hook. It might look like an arrowhead, but when you activate it, it shoots out and pins to a target. The pulleys and springs allow for recoil, and the thread replaces traditional rope. With these, you can pull yourself toward something or pull something toward you. Damon examined the braces closely, turning them over in his hands. The craftsmanship was impeccable, and the functionality sounded impressive. Still, he was cautious. This is definitely not what I expected. Anvil clapped him on the back, nearly knocking him forward. That's the beauty of it. You'll see. Once you get the hang of these, you'll wonder how you ever live without them. Anvil gave Damon a quick glance and grinned. I could try explaining it all, but it would take too much time. So, I made a small manual. It's hard to use, but if you train yourself, it could even come in handy during a fight. Carl's, standing nearby, eyed the braces warily as Damon inspected them with his dark, unreadable eyes. Hey, old man, I get it's a hook, but those strings don't seem strong enough to carry a grown man. Won't they just snap? Before Anvil could answer, Damon ran his fingers along one of the strings. A faint hiss escaped his lips as a thin cut appeared on his finger. This is the webbing of a crystal arachne, or rather, its threads, Damon muttered. Anvil nodded proudly. Carls paled at the mention of the monster. The crystal arachne was a spider-like creature feared even by seasoned adventurers, capable of killing third-class advancements or higher. Its webbing was tougher than steel, and its body was even deadlier. How did you even get your hands on something like that? Carls asked, his voice trembling slightly. Anvil shrugged casually. It's not that expensive. Most people only care about the mana core and the tough body of the beast. Its webs are too sharp to handle, so they're usually discarded. Lucky for you, I've got a knack for making use of what others throw away. Damon rolled up his sleeves and strapped the braces on his arms. They felt surprisingly comfortable, almost as if they were made specifically for him. He tightened the belts around them and glanced at Anvil. How do I use it? Anvil handed him a small book filled with detailed diagrams and instructions. This is the manual. Read it. Damon nodded, flipping through the pages briefly before tucking the manual into his cloak. Sure, but how much do I actually owe you? Anvil shook his head. Like I said before, it's 10,000 for the extra work. I'm not taking a penny more. Carls raised an eyebrow. This must have cost more than a few thousand to make. Damon, though reluctant to part with money, had to admit that Anvil had likely shouldered much of the expense himself. Anvil crossed his arms. My work is my pride. I said 10,000, and that's final. If you don't like it, leave the stuff behind, and I'll refund your. Damon sighed, accepting the terms. Fine. Not like I wanted to pay more anyway. Anvil grinned. That's the spirit. Eager to test the device, Damon followed the manual's first instructions. He aimed at a training dummy, activating the mechanism. The hook shot out with a faint hiss, embedding itself in the target. The strings were so thin they were almost invisible. He flipped to the next section of the manual and tried pulling the dummy toward himself. However, he underestimated the pull force of the springs and lost his footing, getting yanked forward and smashing headfirst into the dummy. Ack! My head! Damon groaned, sprawled on the ground. Anvil and Carls exchanged a glance before bursting into laughter. Carls clutched his stomach. I can't believe it. The great phantom, fumbling like a rookie. Anvil pointed, tears of laughter streaming down his face. Careful, kid. You've got to get used to the recoil. Damon got up awkwardly, rubbing his head. The pain stung more than his pride. He pulled his blindfold back over his eyes, more to hide his embarrassment than block out the excess information from his shadow perception. Right. I'll keep that in mind. I should probably read the entire manual before trying anything else. If I'm not careful, I'll end up as a stain on the wall. Anvil nodded sagely. It's dangerous, sure, but I made it knowing you'd figure it out. Those strings aren't just for grappling. They're perfect for strangling someone, too. Carl sighed heavily. Why do I feel like you just handed him a tool for murder when all he wanted was a grappling hook? Damon silently inspected the braces, their weight familiar now. He could already think of dozens of applications for them. As he glanced at his shadow, he sensed it watching him. Through its perspective, he caught a glimpse of himself, a faint, dangerous smile spreading across his face. Damon's muscles ached as he sat in Anvil's workshop, the sourness of exhaustion creeping through his body. He had spent the last 3 hours in the smith's cluttered shop, mastering the controls of what he now called the omnidirectional gear. The name felt fitting for the intricate mechanism Anvil had crafted. The usual rhythmic hammering from earlier was gone. It was a kind of mourning. Anvil, like the rest of the town, was grieving the death of the kind hunter Carmen Vale. It had been a few days since Carmen's death was discovered. The town had come together for a funeral, though there was no body to bury, just a few personal belongings that symbolized the man he had been. Most assumed his body had been consumed by a monster. They weren't wrong. Damon had consumed him. As he flipped through the manual, deciphering the intricate controls of the gear, Anvil spoke in a wistful tone about Carmen, his voice tinged with sorrow. Meanwhile, Carls had been sent on an errand by Damon to pick up supplies and withdraw 10,000 zenny to pay Anvil. The smith, oblivious to Damon's role in Carmen's death, continued reminiscing about the man who had touched so many lives. Damon listened, feeling an uncomfortable knot forming in his chest. Guilt? Regret? It was hard to say, but the old man's words made the air feel heavier. The omnidirectional gear was tricky to master, but after 3 hours of practice, Damon had figured out the basics. Anything beyond simple movements still felt dangerous, so he set it aside and decided to ask more about Carmen. He already knew some details from Carl's, like the name of Carmen's daughter, Aetherus, a pink-haired girl, but he wanted to understand more. How could he command so much loyalty even after he's gone? It feels like the whole town is angry over his death, Damon asked, his tone quiet but curious. Anvil sighed heavily, setting down his tools. Honestly, I never really got the man. He was always sticking his nose in other people's business, but not in a bad way. If someone needed help, he'd come running, even if they didn't ask for it. And he wouldn't take no for an answer. The smith's eyes moistened as he continued. You could call him an oddball, but he was kind, always trying to see the best in people, even the ones who didn't deserve it. That's probably why everyone loved him so much. Anvil glanced at Damon, his voice softening. His magic was being kind, and that magic, it touched everyone. Damon nodded slowly, his expression grim beneath the blindfold. Kindness is reciprocal, he said after a moment. Anvil chuckled, a faint smile breaking through his sorrow. Yeah, that's exactly what he used to say. There's not a single person in this town he hadn't helped before. This world lost a great man, and it'll probably never recover. Folks like him, they're one in a million. Though his eyes were hidden, Damon's posture grew even gloomier. The weight of Anvil's words pressed down on him. The smith, noticing Damon's somber demeanor, spoke again, his voice filled with quiet conviction. You know, kid, he might be dead, but he's not forgotten. The people he helped, they'll remember him. Damon raised his head slightly, the phrase resonating in his mind. Dead but not forgotten. He murmured, the words heavy with meaning. Damon took a deep breath, trying to steady himself as a familiar churn twisted his stomach. His legacy, huh? He's dead. The whole town mourns him because he was kind. If I died, who would even care? No one would remember. I'd just be another corpse. My parents were kind. And how did the village repay them? He clenched his fists tightly, his nails digging into his palms. But Carmen Vale is different. Maybe kindness is reciprocal. I can't undo what's been done, and I can't atone either. But I can try to be better. He glanced at Anvil, his thoughts momentarily quieting. You know, I wanted to be a hero when I was a kid, Damon admitted, his voice low but steady. Anvil raised an eyebrow before bursting into laughter. Don't we all? He roared, wiping his hands on cloth. Damon wasn't deterred by the reaction. His expression darkened as he pressed on. But somewhere along the way, life hit me with all its trials. I came to really hate people for their treachery. Kindness became a symbol of people who die early. I wanted to pick a path of remorselessness. He paused deliberately, lowering his head. No hesitation in action. No pause for regrets. Anvil let out a deep sigh, setting down his tools. You're too young to be this gloomy, and you're too young to give up on making regrets. If you have no regrets, can you even say you've lived? Take it from an old man. It's impossible to go through life without regrets. No pause for regrets doesn't mean no regrets. I think it means moving forward despite them. Damon nodded, absorbing the words. I take it you have many. Anvil smiled, his gaze distant. And I carry them with pride, he said. Carmen had plenty too. He was a trouble guy in his youth, or so he said. Had some serious anger issues. Lost everything. Watched his wife and sons die right in front of him. Lost his noble house. Forced to flee with only his young daughter. And yet, he managed to smile after all that. That guy was tough stuff. Damon nodded again, this time more resolutely. Thanks for the advice, Anvil. I appreciate your perspective. Wouldn't really call that advice, Anvil muttered, shaking his head. Still, Damon understood now. He had a path to follow, his own way of paying back what he owed to Carmen. In a sense, even though he had killed and consumed the man, Carmen had still saved him. His kindness had left a mark. It was up to Damon to carry that legacy forward. Not through kindness. That wasn't his way. He had a different idea in mind. The door flung open, and Carl stumbled in, carrying a small bundle. "Ah, Damon, you're such a slave driver," he complained, dropping the bundle on a nearby table. "I don't even know why you need hair dye and explosive ice crystals." He tossed a pouch toward Anvil. "And here's your pay from the outlet." "Geez, I'm beat." Carls glanced at Damon with a grin. "I'm glad you're starting to trust me enough to send me to get stuff for you." Damon shook his head. "No, you're still a shady character. I just didn't want to risk running into the student council in town. That's all." Carls clutched his chest in mock pain. "You break my heart, Damon. How can you be so cruel?" Damon ignored him, picking up the bundle. He stood, stretching his sore muscles, and pulled up his hood. "Thanks for everything, Anvil. If I need more weapons, I'll be back." Anvil sneered, crossing his arms. "Oh, I don't doubt it. You're a repeat customer now. Those hollow arrows and braces will need maintenance, so you'll be back. And I intend to charge you really good." Damon sighed, shaking his head. "I knew it. It was just too good to be true. I'm still going to be losing money after all." With that, he turned and walked out, the bundle in hand, a new resolve settling over him. Damon parted ways with Carls, muttering a quick farewell. There was something he needed to take care of alone. After asking for directions a few times, he reached his destination. Pulling his hood lower, he adjusted the blindfold over his eyes. It was an odd look, but it worked. Most people assumed he was blind and paid him little mind. He stopped in front of the house, a modest building nestled in a quieter part of Aether's sanctuary. The tall walls and trees surrounding it gave the residents a sense of seclusion, shielding it from the bustle of the main town. The compound boasted a large garden space, its tranquility broken only by the occasional chirp of night creatures. Damon's shadow perception expanded, stretching out to encompass the entire residence. His senses probed the house and the grounds. The interior was empty, but his focus shifted to the garden. There he found his target. A girl, perhaps his age or slightly younger, stood before a charred training dummy. Her hands glowed with magical flames as she hurled fiery blasts at the dummy, the light casting fleeting shadows across the yard. Damon lingered outside the walls, debating his next move. Should he knock on the front door? The thought seemed ridiculous. He dismissed it quickly. Instead, he made his way to the back, scaling the wall with practiced ease. Walking along its edge, he climbed into a nearby tree. The shadows beneath the tree wrapped around him like a protective cloak, making him almost invisible. A raven landed on a branch nearby, its piercing gaze locked on him. Damon glanced at his own shadow, now darker and seemingly alive, shifting subtly as if disapproving of his actions. "Hey, should I really be doing this?" Damon whispered. His shadow waved its head, clearly disagreeing. "Geez, thanks for the vote of confidence," Damon muttered. "But I'm still going to do it." His heart pounded in his chest as he watched the girl continue her relentless training. Her pink flames lit up the night, fierce and vibrant, yet controlled. Damon's shadow motioned impatiently, as if urging him to move. "Give me a moment," he hissed, his voice barely audible. "It's not like I killed her father or anything." The raven made a soft caw, almost as if it had something to say. Damon shot at a warning glare. Croft, the raven, took the hint and remained silent. Damon rewarded its cooperation with dried meat, which the bird eagerly snatched from his hand. Taking another deep breath, Damon felt his hands tremble slightly. He had never imagined he'd meet Carmen Vale's daughter. Life had a way of throwing unexpected challenges, and this was no exception. It's now or never, he thought, steeling himself. But his body refused to move. No matter how much he willed himself to jump off the branch, he remained frozen in place. He sighed, biting his lip in frustration. "Since when did I become such a coward? Oh, goddess, give me the strength to do this." The prayer felt hollow. Damon knew better than to expect divine intervention, especially for someone like him. A thief, a murderer, and most of all, an unbeliever. Resigned, he leaned back against the tree trunk, deciding to watch for now. The yard was illuminated by faint lamplight, casting a warm glow over the girl and her surroundings. The moons were absent tonight, leaving the sky dark and foreboding. Pulling out a pouch of dried meat, Damon held up a piece. Croft fluttered down, perching on his hand to claim its reward. Damon's gaze returned to the girl. She moved with determination, sending blasts of pink flames at the dummy. Each attack carried power, but her form was riddled with imperfections. She's got potential, but her technique needs work, Damon mused. Despite his lack of skill in magic, he had read extensively on the subject. In fact, it was his obsession with advanced magical theories that had caused him to fail his first quarter semester exams. Who studies second-year material while preparing for a first-year exam? He thought bitterly, almost blushing at the memory. Of course, it wasn't entirely his fault. Marcus had deliberately set him up by handing out the wrong semester's study materials. Damon shook his head at the thought. I'm so going to kill that guy someday. Still, there had been some upside to the blunder. Damon now possessed a wealth of upper-level knowledge, and with time, he had caught up on the foundational basics. Unfortunately, his poor mana reserves and lack of proper spellcasting experience remained significant obstacles. Even with all my theoretical knowledge, I'm still miles behind someone like Sylvia Moonvale, he thought, frowning. For now, Damon settled into his perch, his critical eyes analyzing every move Iris Vale made. Damon sighed, shaking his head at her wild form. You're doing it wrong, he called out, his voice calm, but carrying a sharp undertone of critique. The girl in the yard froze mid-motion, spinning around, startled. Her eyes darted wildly, trying to locate the source of the voice. Who said that? She demanded, her voice trembling slightly. Her face was set in a frown, but her hands betrayed her fear, shaking visibly as the pink flames flickered out. Damon leaned against the tree, concealed by the thick shadows. He smirked as he watched her growing panic. You're wasting mana, he continued, his voice floating through the yard. If you want to create a proper magic blast spell, you need to compress your mana. Don't let it escape. Her eyes widened at his words, her head snapping from side to side as she scanned the darkness. Answer me. Who the hell are you? She shouted, her tone more desperate now. Damon considered his options, then decided to lean into the mysterious act. It was more entertaining that way. I smell fear, he said, his voice low and taunting. Are you afraid? Iris gritted her teeth, her fear giving way to anger. That's it, you bastard. I'm burning this whole place down, she yelled, her hands igniting with pink flames that roared to life. Damon chuckled softly. Really now? You might want to rethink that. Burn down your house, and you'll have to live on the streets. Trust me, that's not a good idea. Her stance shifted into a combat-ready position, her flames burning brighter and hotter. Fine by me, she growled, her eyes filled with determination. Damon sighed, running a hand through his hair. Is this girl crazy? What a hothead, he thought. Realizing the situation was escalating fast, he stood up and leapt gracefully from the tree, landing in the yard with a soft thud. Calm down, he said, raising his hands in mock surrender. I am not your enemy. Before he could finish, two blazing fireballs hurtled toward him, their heat searing the air. Huh? What the? Is she crazy? Damon thought as he instinctively ducked and rolled, narrowly avoiding the flaming projectiles. The fireballs crashed into a nearby tree, scorching its trunk and sending a shower of embers into the night. Damon scrambled to his feet, glaring at the girl. Are you out of your mind? He snapped, brushing soot off his cloak. I just said I'm not your enemy. Iris smirked, her flames crackling around her hands. Prove it. Damon groaned inwardly. This was not how he'd planned for things to go. Damon smirked at her sharp words, crossing his arms casually. What a firecracker, he thought, taking in her defiant stance. The girl stood in front of him, her short pink hair plastered to her skin with sweat. She wore brown pants and a white shirt, both worn and frayed, evidence of her frequent training. Her piercing blue eyes glared at him with suspicion and fiery determination. He sighed, tilting his head slightly. Something tells me you're not going to listen to me. She narrowed her eyes further, the flames in her hands flickering ominously. Oh yeah? What gave you that impression? He pointed to the fireball she held. Well, for starters, You're holding a literal ball of flames while looking like you're ready to incinerate me. She didn't lower her guard, her expression hardening. Says the shady guy sneaking into my yard, dressed like some hooded creep. I should scream, pervert, or rapist, and have you dragged away. Damon winced inwardly at the threat, knowing how troublesome that would be for him. And yet, you haven't, he said, his voice calm but pointed. She glared at him, her hands tightening. I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt. Barely. Damon chuckled softly, the sound echoing in the quiet night. Go ahead, then. Scream all you like. Your voice won't travel far enough for anyone to hear you. Her face paled slightly, and her gaze flickered to her surroundings as if realizing the truth in his words. Seeing her hesitation, Damon softened his tone. But there's no need for that. I'm not here to hurt you. He reached up and pulled down his hood, revealing his pale face. Her blue eyes widened when she saw the black blindfold covering his eyes. His dark hair framed his face, giving him a slightly melancholic appearance, though he still wore a faint, almost playful smile. Are you blind? She asked hesitantly. Damon nodded. At the moment, yes, but I can see the world just fine in my own way. She stared at him, clearly confused, but sensing no immediate threat. Why are you here? Are you a friend of my father's? Damon's heart sank at her words, his chest tightening as the weight of his past actions bore down on him. He hesitated, then answered carefully. Perhaps. Let's just say I owe him my life. Her eyes lowered, her expression darkening. He's dead. Whatever debts you had are repaid. You can leave now. He shook his head slowly. Don't you want to get into the academy? Her head snapped up at his question. Her interest piqued despite her guarded demeanor. I do, but what's that got to do with you? Damon took a deliberate step closer, his tone steady. I can help you get in. She raised an eyebrow, crossing her arms skeptically. Oh, really? And how exactly do you plan to do that? Don't tell me you've got a golden ticket or something. He chuckled softly, shaking his head. No golden ticket, but I can help you train to pass the entrance exam. She eyed him warily as he bit his lip, hesitant but resolute. Become my apprentice. For a moment, Iris simply stared at him, then burst out laughing, her voice filled with disbelief. Ha ha ha. Are you for real right now? You want me to be your apprentice? Her laughter faded as she glared at him, her tone turning sharp again. Are you insane? You're barely older than me, and you don't even look strong. Honestly, you look like a stiff breeze could knock you over. You'd probably fail the academy entrance exam yourself, let alone train someone else. Damon stayed calm, watching her reaction closely through his shadow perception. Despite her words, he could sense her curiosity and the faintest hint of intrigue beneath her fiery exterior. She's testing me, he thought, a smirk forming on his lips. Time to show her I'm not as weak as I look. I'm loath to admit she's right. I didn't survive the entrance exam. Hell, I came in through a back door I didn't even deserve. But I'm not the same guy anymore. I don't have many talents, but I know a lot about the academy. For the things I don't know, I can get help. I can share resources with her. So, this is something I have to do. Damon sighed, keeping his expression calm. Don't be ridiculous. I'm actually very strong. Time to bluff my way through this. Iris raised an eyebrow, skepticism written all over her face. You? Strong? You don't look it. Damon pulled his cloak back slightly, revealing the intricate design of his academy uniform beneath. The black and gold embroidery shimmered faintly in the dim light, and the insignia of the academy gleamed on his chest. Of course, he had removed his brooch of shame beforehand. Her eyes lingered on it, curiosity flickering beneath her guarded expression. Damon smirked inwardly. Finally got your attention. Huh. Iris took a step closer, her gaze fixed on the uniform. She bit her lip, her eyes narrowing. So what? There are plenty of students at the academy. How strong are you really? Damon had been waiting for that question. He crossed his arms and tilted his head slightly, his tone laced with feigned indifference. Oh, me? Not very strong. I only defeated the strongest students in my year. No big deal. I even went up against Lilith Astronova. Her eyes widened, her breath catching slightly. No way. You fought the student council president. Damon didn't respond immediately, letting the weight of his words sink in. I went up against her. I never said I fought her. He kept his expression neutral, content to let her misinterpret his vague statement. She's very interested in me after she lost, in fact. I'm one of the few people in the academy who has permission to call her by name. Iris's shock deepened. Of course, that wasn't entirely a lie. Lilith had told him to call her by her name, and she was interested in him, though her interest stemmed from a desire to hunt him down, not admiration. But there was no need for Iris to know that. Iris tilted her head, her skepticism battling with her newfound awe. Is that so? Then you've reached the first-class advancement, at least. Damon's eye twitched, but he quickly composed himself. No, but then we have nothing more to talk about. Damon blinked, startled by her abrupt dismissal. What this girl? He chuckled lightly, regaining his composure. I suppose you haven't heard of people like me. I'm actually the most well-known student in my year. All the professors had their eyes on me, although they despise me now. Iris sneered, her skepticism returning in full force. So what? You're just some guy. Damon bit the inside of his cheek, suppressing his irritation. Tell you what, want to make 200,000 zenny. Her brows shot up. I'm not interested in selling myself into prostitution, sorry. He suppressed the urge to groan, his patience wearing thin. What the hell do nobles think prostitution is? Prostitution would have been cheaper. He raised his academy-issued pager, the device glowing faintly in his hand. Let's duel. If you win, I'll give you 200,000 zenny. If you lose, you become my apprentice. Iris sneered again, crossing her arms. As if, do I look crazy? Why would I take on an academy student in a magical duel? That's suicide. Damon smiled, unfazed. Good, she's interested. Running this house must cost her money. I imagine she doesn't want to live off people's charity forever. Oh, but there's a caveat. I won't use any magic at all. Because I suck at magic with abysmal mana level, he thought bitterly, though his expression remained confident. Iris narrowed her eyes, still skeptical, but clearly tempted. Damon decided to push her further. Or, you could stay here, living off the charity of the townspeople. I'll take my money and go. This should be easy money for someone as capable as you. Unless you're scared. Unless you want to be a parasite your whole life. Iris gritted her teeth, his words hitting a nerve. Her hands flared with pink flames as she glared at him. You're on. The dim glow of the street lamps barely illuminated the scene, their pale light struggling to penetrate the darkness of the night. Iris kept her gaze fixed on Damon, her resolve unwavering. Though his features were obscured by the blindfold he wore, she didn't need to see his eyes to gauge his abilities. He had agreed not to use magic, and he hadn't reached the first-class advancement. Victory was assured. Her pink flames flickered brightly in the gloom, casting long shadows that danced across the cobblestones. If I win, I won't have to rely on what my father left behind, or worse, the pity of the townsfolk's charity. The thought steeled her determination. Damon, on the other hand, stood relaxed, seemingly unbothered. Despite the blindfold, he could see perfectly thanks to his shadow perception. The darkness was his ally, and the faint shadows cast by Iris flames only enhanced his awareness. She doesn't stand a chance at night, he mused, tightening his fists. The shifting shadows around her betrayed the movements of her flames, making it almost laughably easy to anticipate where they would strike. Still, I hope this is the right decision. His shadow flickered briefly, as if disagreeing with his thoughts. Damon couldn't help but notice its subtle reproach. I'm not going back on my resolve, he thought, determined. I'm just testing a different approach. Okay, Iris, are you ready? He asked, his voice calm and steady. Her flames flared brighter, the pink hue illuminating her fierce expression. More than ready. You're going down, creep. Damon sighed, his tone laced with mock pity. No need to hurt my feelings. I'll be sure to hold back so I don't hurt you. Lies, he admitted to himself. He fully intended to go all out, even without magic. Taking on someone using magic without countering with his own was a risky move. One only a fool would attempt unless they'd reached the first-class advancement, where their physical body surpassed human limits. Thankfully, Damon wasn't relying on human strength alone. He had the 5x skill. Iris stood poised, awaiting the signal, her flames coiling around her hands like eager serpents. On the count of 3, Damon began, his voice carrying the tension in the air. 1, 2, 3. Before he could finish the count, Iris unleashed a blazing torrent of pink flames. The heat surged toward him like a tidal wave, fierce and unrelenting. Reacting instantly, Damon shot the omnidirectional gear toward the wall behind her. The hook latched onto the stone with a metallic clink, and the tension in the wires grew taut as he activated the mechanism. He underestimated the gear's pull force again. Instead of smoothly launching himself to safety, Damon was yanked off his feet like a rag doll, the flames narrowly missing him as he hurtled forward. Momentum carried him straight into Iris, his head colliding with her stomach. "Gah!" she gasped, the impact forcing the breath from her lungs. The force sent them both crashing into the wall behind her with a resounding thud. Damon groaned, his head pounding from the collision. He shook it off and staggered to his feet, holding his temple. "Ouch, my head!" He glanced down and froze. Iris lay slumped against the wall, completely unconscious. Her pink hair framed her delicate face, now devoid of the fiery determination she'd shown moments earlier. Oh, he muttered, staring at her limp form. "I didn't mean to do that." From the corner of his eye, he saw his shadow shift. It moved to the wall and mimicked a facepalm, the silent gesture oozing exasperation. Not a word, Damon grumbled, glaring at the shadow. He crouched down, inspecting Iris to ensure she was unharmed. "She's just knocked out." "Good. I'd rather avoid explaining this if she were seriously hurt." Standing up, he retracted the gear's hook, which zipped back into the bracer with a faint click. He looked down at the unconscious girl once more and sighed. "This isn't how I pictured this duel going," he muttered, rubbing the back of his neck awkwardly. Damon chuckled awkwardly as a raven swooped down from a nearby tree branch, landing squarely on Iris's unconscious form. The bird tilted its head, its beady eyes glinting in the dim light, and pecked at her lightly with its beak. "Caw-caw! Dead! Dead! Killer! Killer!" the raven squawked, its mocking voice cutting through the silence. "Shut up, you stupid bird. She's still alive," Damon hissed, swatting Croft away. The raven flapped its wings indignantly, retreating a few feet, but not leaving entirely. Damon's heart thundered in his chest, his mind racing. Everything had happened so fast, too fast. His remorseless skill hadn't even activated, likely because he hadn't truly seen the exchange as a battle. But that didn't excuse the reckless blunder he'd made. He glanced at the unconscious girl again, guilt creeping into his thoughts. Using a tool I haven't mastered in a fight, what was I thinking? Croft let out another caw, as if taunting him. "Dead! Dead!" Damon's stomach twisted. He clenched his fists, trying to push away the memories. He had killed her father, unwillingly, but it didn't change the fact that his hands were stained. He didn't want any more harm to come to her. He didn't want her to die, especially not by his hand. "And I won't let anyone else kill her either," he vowed silently. In a corner of his heart, a small, selfish voice whispered that this resolve wasn't entirely noble. Perhaps that was why his shadow seemed so disapproving of this entire arrangement. He crouched down beside her, his sharp eyes scanning her still form. She was breathing, the faint rise and fall of her chest evident. But just to be certain, he leaned closer, pressing 2 fingers gently against her neck to check her pulse. Her heartbeat was steady, but Damon hesitated, lowering his ear to her chest. The softness of her frame pressed against his head as he confirmed her heart's rhythm. From the corner of his vision, his shadow shifted, forming a gesture that clearly resembled a shake of disapproval. It then pointed directly at him, as if to say, was that last part really necessary? Damon shrugged, smirking faintly. Better safe than sorry. Satisfied that she was okay, he straightened and exhaled a sigh of relief. Gently, he picked her up, cradling her in his arms. Her pink hair cascaded over her shoulder, and for a moment, he was struck by how fragile she seemed. "At least I get to keep my money," he thought, a small consolation amidst his guilt. The door to her house creaked open as he nudged it with his foot, stepping into the dimly lit kitchen. His shadow spread out ahead of him, scanning the house to locate her room, but Damon halted at mid-search. Taking a girl? I just met into her room? Yeah, no. Not a great idea, especially after she threatened to scream pervert earlier. Sighing, he carried her to the living room instead. A large plush sofa caught his eye, and he carefully placed her down on it. He pulled a blanket from a nearby armchair and draped it over her unconscious form. Taking a seat on a wooden chair by the fireplace, Damon leaned back, watching the flickering flames cast long, dancing shadows across the room. Croft landed on the armrest beside him, cocking its head expectantly. Damon tore a piece of dried meat from his pouch and handed it to the raven, who cawed in approval. "This is going to take a while," Damon muttered under his breath. The stillness of the room was interrupted by the faint vibration of his pager. He pulled it from his pocket, flipping it open. The name on the display made his heart skip a beat. "Damn," he whispered, gripping the pager tightly. Damon's fingers tightened slightly around the pager as he raised it to his ear. Anxiety gripped him, though he tried to mask it. The caller was from the Healing Institute in Valyrian, a woman whose voice always seemed calm and composed, even when delivering unsettling news. Healer Floral Eston. She was a specialist in treating magic circuit cancer, and one of the few people Damon felt genuine gratitude toward. It wasn't a feeling he extended often, almost never, but for her, he made an exception. There were a scant few who had earned that sentiment. Sarah's Blade, even though he had never met her. Carmen Vale, whose philosophy had subtly influenced his current path. And of course, Flora Eston. "Good evening." Her soft voice came through the line, steady and professional. Damon returned the greeting, his voice neutral, masking the turmoil brewing inside him. The call was brief. She updated him on the expenses related to his sister's care, payments he needed to make, transfers to authorize. It wasn't unexpected, but hearing the numbers still made his stomach churn. When the call ended, Damon leaned back in the wooden chair by the fire, staring at the flickering flames. He had asked for his sister to be transferred to a better ward, one with higher-level care. The cost? 500,000 zenny. He opened his pager and initiated the transfer to the Institute's Warback account under Luna Grey's name. As always, Flora Eston would ensure the funds were allocated properly. When the transaction completed, Damon exhaled heavily and cradled his head in his hands. His chest felt tight, a mixture of relief and frustration flooding his thoughts. My luck must be improving. If it weren't for the duel with Xander, I'd have been short. The payout from that encounter had kept him afloat, but just barely. He still had a few thousand zenny left, but with the mounting expenses, it was nowhere near enough. He needed more money, soon. Leaning back in the chair, he closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the tension in his shoulders. The problems just keep piling up. There's never enough time. He slipped the pager into his pocket, his shadow flitting across the room erratically. Its movements were a reflection of his own restless mind, and he couldn't help but think about the burden it imposed on him. The shadow's hunger. As long as that mechanic of his existence persisted, trouble would always follow. And worse, his shadow didn't feed on animals, only people. He had considered monsters, but in this region, the monsters were nearly as strong as someone in their first-class advancement or higher. This was the evil forest territory, after all. "I'll take my chances with people," Damon thought grimly, though he wasn't proud of the conclusion. Deep down, he suspected that even monster flesh wouldn't satisfy the shadow's hunger. It wasn't a physical need. It was instinct, primal and undeniable, like a predator's urge to hunt. "I'll deal with that later. Right now, I need to focus on regaining my energy. Half my shadow energy reserves are gone. I'll need to replenish them soon." Damon sat by the fire, staring into the dancing flames. Shadows bent and stretched around the room, creating intricate patterns that he watched with idle curiosity. It helped keep his mind from wandering to thoughts of his sister. If he let himself dwell on it too much, he might find himself sprinting toward the capital city without a plan. Time slipped by unnoticed. Hours passed as Damon remained still, his senses attuned to the subtle ways shadows moved and flickered in the firelight. A soft groan broke the silence, pulling his attention back to the room. Iris stirred on the sofa, her eyelids fluttering open. She blinked slowly, her gaze unfocused at first as she adjusted to her surroundings. The first thing Iris noticed was the flickering light of the fireplace she had lit earlier that evening. The room was dim, illuminated only by the dancing flames. Her gaze drifted to the familiar sofa beneath her and the wooden chair in the corner, her father's usual spot after returning from a hunt. Her eyes widened as she focused on the figure seated in the chair. It wasn't her father. Instead, it was the strange young man from earlier. He radiated an unsettling aura, his presence heavy with an inexplicable mystique. His short, dark hair framed his face, partially obscured by a black blindfold that seemed more ominous in the dim light. The shadows surrounding him appeared unnaturally dark, almost alive, and perched on the armrest was a raven, its beady eyes fixed on her with an unsettling calmness. "You're awake," the man said, his voice as composed as his demeanor. Iris blinked, still trying to process her surroundings. She couldn't fathom how he could see her with that blindfold covering his eyes. She nodded slowly, her mind racing to recall the events that had led her here. She remembered their duel, the sudden clash, the burst of her flames, and then nothing. I lost," she murmured, the words bitter on her tongue. Damon nodded, his expression unreadable. "You did, and as per our agreement, you're now my apprentice." Iris didn't argue. She simply stared at him, the weight of her defeat still sinking in. "How did you do that?" she asked, her voice laced with a mix of awe and frustration. "How can you move so fast?" Damon shook his head, unwilling to divulge the embarrassing truth of his near blunder. "I'm not fast, you're just slow." Iris took a deep breath, wincing as her aching body protested. "Who are you? What's your name? And how do you know my father?" Damon expected the questions, but couldn't afford to be entirely honest. "My name is Damon Grey," he replied evenly. "As for your father, like I said, I owe him my life." She nodded, though her doubt lingered. She pressed him with a few more questions, and Damon responded with carefully crafted half-truths, sidestepping anything that might unravel his story. Growing tired of the interrogation and sensing the conversation edging toward dangerous territory, he decided to shift her focus. "I've been your guest for 3 hours," he said with a faint smirk. "Can I at least get some tea?" Iris raised an eyebrow. "Actually, you invited yourself in." Damon chuckled softly. "Good to see you're lively again. But don't forget, you're my apprentice now." Iris sighed, her reluctance evident. "Fine, whatever. I'll make some tea." Damon found her grudging compliance amusing. "Good girl." She shot him a glare before heading toward the kitchen. "Do you have any preference for tea, Mr. Damon?" "No, and you can call me Master." Iris turned to glare at him again, her tone sharp. "Like hell I would. You're not much older than me." Damon smirked. "Fair enough. Then I suppose Damon will do just fine. Drop the mister, though." Iris nodded curtly and busied herself in the kitchen. It wasn't long before she returned with a pot of tea and 2 cups arranged neatly on a tray. Damon reflexively picked up the pot, pouring tea for both of them. He brought the cup to his lips, savoring the warmth before setting it down. When he glanced up, Iris was glaring at him, her fists clenched tightly. "Are you a noble?" she asked, her tone cold and accusatory. Damon tilted his head, confused. "No, I'm not." Iris stood abruptly, her eyes narrowing. "Liar." Damon was caught off guard by her sudden outburst. The sharpness of her tone and the anger in her eyes were unexpected. Her emotions seemed to boil over without warning, leaving him momentarily speechless. It wasn't the first time he'd seen such resentment. He recognized the look. It was one he was all too familiar with. "I'm not a noble," Damon said calmly, leaning back in his chair. "I don't think you've ever heard of a noble family named Grey, have you?" Iris didn't seem convinced. Her gaze shifted to the teacup in front of him, her lips pressing into a thin line. "But you have to be," she insisted. "That tea etiquette. Only nobles bother with that kind of refinement." Damon tilted his head slightly, perplexed. Tea etiquette? Yes, she snapped. The way you hold the cup, pour the tea. Everything about it screams noble upbringing. Damon chuckled softly, setting the teacup down. This is just how I normally drink tea. My mother was very particular about it. He sighed. But no, I'm definitely not a noble. Iris studied him, her brow furrowed in uncertainty. After a long pause, she bit her lip and sat down, her shoulders slumping slightly. I apologize for my outburst, she murmured, her voice quieter now. Damon shook his head dismissively. It's fine. You're quite the hothead, though. Her cheeks flushed, and she avoided his gaze. You don't seem to like nobles very much, he observed, his tone neutral. Her expression darkened instantly, and her fists clenched on her lap. I hate them, she spat through gritted teeth. The intensity in her voice struck a chord with Damon, sparking a vague sense of déjà vu fate. It seemed, enjoyed playing strange games. Not long ago, he'd said something similar to her father. He recalled the man's response, calm but firm, and decided to answer her in his own way. I hate them too, Damon said, his voice steady. Iris blinked, surprised. Her head tilted slightly as she studied his face, searching for any trace of insincerity. He smiled faintly. What? They suck. They treat people horribly. I can't imagine why anyone would like them. Her lips quirked upward ever so slightly, though her anger hadn't fully faded. She nodded in agreement as Damon picked up his teacup again. Why do you hate them? He asked, glancing at her over the rim of his cup. Aren't you a former noble? Your old man didn't seem to have a problem with them. Iris's jaw tightened, and her fists balled even tighter. Fallen noble, she corrected bitterly. We're not the same. People like me get worse treatment than commoners. At first, even the commoners didn't like us. Damon nodded, unsurprised. It was a predictable outcome, given the rigid hierarchies of the world they lived in. Iris's face twisted in frustration. We're in this mess because of nobles. They framed my father and took everything we had. They're all two-faced hypocrites. Her voice cracked as she continued, her emotions spilling over like a dam breaking under pressure. If it weren't for them, my father wouldn't have been killed by a monster. He'd still be alive. If it weren't for them, my mother would still be alive. My brothers wouldn't have died. Damon remained silent, watching as tears began to streak down her cheeks. Her shoulders trembled, and she tried in vain to hold herself together, but the grief she'd been suppressing for so long was finally surfacing. He kept his expression neutral, though the turmoil within him threatened to break free. If it weren't for me, your father would still be alive. The thought echoed in his mind, heavy with guilt, but he couldn't say it aloud. If he did, the number of people who wanted him dead would skyrocket. So he stayed quiet, his calm demeanor masking the storm inside. All he could do was let her cry, her sorrow filling the silence of the room as he suppressed his own inner conflict. Is that why you wanted to get into the academy? To restore your family's name? Damon asked, his voice calm but probing. Iris stopped sobbing and looked up at him with tear-streaked cheeks and reddened eyes. Her lips trembled, but she remained silent, prompting him to continue. The academy is a good place to start if you manage to survive there. When you graduate, you'll instantly be someone well-regarded. Positions of power will be within reach, and with that, you could restore House Vale, Damon explained, his tone pragmatic. Iris nodded slowly, the spark of determination flickering in her weary expression. That was the plan, she admitted. But my father, he didn't want to restore the house. He was content here. He said revenge would only bring pain and spread more pain. He believed the best revenge was to live happily. Damon nodded. It sounded like something Carmen Vale would say, sentiment steeped in wisdom. But Damon, a man who had embraced vengeance more than once, couldn't agree. Your father is a wise man, he remarked. Iris glanced at him skeptically. So, you're telling me to give up too? Damon shook his head. I agree he's wise, but I don't agree with that line of thinking. Revenge is satisfying. Seeing the fear in the eyes of those who wronged you, making them beg for their lives, and taking it away, that's satisfying. His lips curled into a thin, almost unsettling smile as he spoke. The words carried a dark edge that made Iris shiver. A wise man once said, "An eye for an eye makes the world go blind," Damon continued, his tone laced with mockery. But that man probably never lost an eye. If he did, he'd want payback. Damon raised his teacup, sipping it leisurely. If revenge is what you want, I'll help you. If the Academy is what you want, I'll help you. If it's someone you want dead, I'll help you. Iris stared at him, trying to gauge the sincerity in his words. "And what's in it for you?" she asked cautiously. Damon held up 2 fingers. "I repay my debts and personal enjoyment." She hesitated for only a moment before responding. "I want all of that." Damon nodded, his expression steady. "You'd have to kill people. Your father wouldn't want that." Iris bit her lip, her gaze hardening. "He's gone now. His ideals won't help me anymore." Damon studied her closely. This wasn't what he had expected. Carmen Vale's daughter wasn't the gentle, meek girl he had imagined. Instead, she was a spitfire, burning with enough hatred for the nobility to willingly team up with someone as shady as him. Despite his uncertainty, Damon made up his mind. He would grant her wish. "All right, then. As my apprentice, I can't let you go off on your own. You're wildly ambitious. If you want to restore your noble house, fine, I'll help. But first, we start with getting you into the Academy," he declared. Iris nodded, determination replacing her tears. "You should be careful, Iris. What you want isn't for the faint of heart. Think it over." "I'll be back tomorrow," Damon said, rising to his feet. "Read the latest on Empire." As he turned, Croft landed gracefully on his shoulder. He opened the door and stepped out into the night, pulling up his hood. He clenched his fist tightly, the cool night air biting against his skin. This was not what I was expecting, he thought. If I do this, I'll be making more enemies in the future. But I've decided. I'll help her see her ambitions through, no matter what. It's just a few nobles. It's not like I haven't killed some already. With that, Damon disappeared into the shadows, his resolve set and his path filled with the inevitable chaos that lay ahead. The sunlight streamed through the window, spilling across Damon's desk where he sat, a thick book on magic history propped open in his hands. Dark circles marred his face, evidence of a sleepless night. With a deep sigh, he flipped the final page, scanning the last paragraph before snapping the book shut. Stretching his arms above his head, he yawned. With this, I've more or less caught up with the first-year curriculum. He wasn't about to be caught lacking in theoretical exams or tests again. After his previous humiliation, he had made it a point to read through the entire syllabus for the year, summarizing and taking meticulous notes to commit it all to memory. What happened last time would never happen again. As for Marcus Fayjoy, the one who caused it, his reckoning was coming. Damon exhaled, setting the book aside and pulling his blindfold back over his tired eyes. He had returned to his dorm late last night after his meeting with Iris, just past midnight, only to find Leona Veilfire sulking in the dorm kitchen. She sat silently, arms crossed, clearly waiting for him. When Damon slipped in, her pout deepened, though she said nothing. It was painfully obvious she was upset that he had left without saying a word. Though guilt didn't weigh on him much, Damon decided to appease her by cooking up a storm. He prepared several hearty meat dishes, reasoning that a full stomach might soften her mood. But more importantly, his encounter with Iris had prompted another thought. He might not be enough to train her. If he was to mold her into someone capable of carrying out her ambitions, he needed help. That was why he decided to get on Leona's good side. He also resolved to ingratiate himself with Sylvia Moonvale. Her vast library of knowledge would undoubtedly prove invaluable. At this rate, I might as well be chummy with everyone, Damon mused. It wasn't just about forming alliances, though. It was about adaptability. Damon prided himself on being supremely flexible, willing to abandon principles and reshape himself to fit any situation. If it meant surviving and thriving, then so be it. His body had mostly recovered, the soreness in his limbs a fading memory. He owed some thanks to the ointments Sylvia and Evangeline had passed along, though he wasn't one for sentimental gratitude. A faint grumble from his stomach interrupted his thoughts, though he quickly dismissed it. It wasn't the shadow hunger, not yet. He estimated he could hold out for another day or two. That gave him just enough time to deal with Tobias Morgan. Damon pulled a cufflink from his pocket, turning it over in his fingers. It belonged to Marcus Fayjoy. Originally, he had planned to lure Tobias out using Isaac's handwriting, but after some thought, he decided on a more elaborate approach. He would mimic Marcus's handwriting, framing him with a fabricated letter and leaving behind this cufflink along with some carefully placed ice crystals. It would be perfect revenge, executed just before Damon turned his attention to Marcus and the last remnants of his group. Coincidentally, the 5 of them would provide just enough to level him up. 5 left. Once I devour them, I won't have any enemies left. But then what? Prey on other students? Damon shook his head, dismissing the thought. That's not a long-term plan. I'll have to target people in Aether's sanctuary. Surely there's some crooks no one would miss. He bit his lip, glancing down at the shadow curling around his feet. What do you think, buddy? Innocent students or crooks in town? The shadow mimicked a thoughtful pose, one hand on his shin before gesturing ambiguously, suggesting both. Damon chuckled darkly, shaking his head. I shouldn't expect you to have any morals. But that's fine, I don't have many either. Still, he weighed the risks carefully. If we go into town, we risk making more enemies. And who knows? Those enemies might turn out to be stronger than expected. But killing innocent students, that's wrong, at least by conventional mortal law. Plus, it could draw the wrath of noble families and the Academy's administration. The shadow moved restlessly, as if contemplating his words. Damon smirked. How about some monster meat instead? At this, the shadow darted to his side, shaking its head furiously while puffing out its chest and flexing exaggerated muscles. I guess that's a no, Damon muttered, amused. As expected. Besides, any monster we encounter in this region could kill me in seconds. Even if you could eat monster meat, I'm not about to risk my life for it. I only gamble with an 80% chance of winning. Still, he wondered about the mechanics of shadow hunger. His shadow could eat monster meat, but it couldn't convert that to shadow energy. I assume it's like that mana crystal. I can gain attribute points, but not shadow energy, or maybe just a boost to one stat. He pushed the thought aside for now. Testing theories was one thing, but not at the expense of his survival. Damon had no intention of dying young, so fighting monsters could wait. Damon rose from the chair with a groggy stretch, the events of the previous night still lingering in his mind. He shuffled into the bathroom and emerged refreshed, droplets of water clinging to his hair. Croft, the raven, was still dozing on a pillow, feathers ruffled from sleep. He dressed quickly, fastening his uniform with practiced efficiency before pinning the brooch to his chest. As he opened the door, the subtle creak stirred Croft, who immediately flapped its wings and landed on Damon's shoulder, settling into its usual perch. Descending to the dining hall on the bottom floor, Damon noted the quiet emptiness. The nobles were still waking, granting him the privilege of having the space to himself. He chose a table near the window and sat down, ready to eat. As he took his first bite, a familiar presence brushed against his senses, Leona Veilfire. Her shadow loomed in his perception before she entered, her golden eyes fixated on him. She said nothing as she approached, her usual boisterous energy conspicuously absent. Damon sighed, recalling how he had cooked for her the night before to lift her mood. She hadn't even offered to repay the favor. Seeing her so quiet was strange, but he had already decided to keep her in his good graces. If he was going to train Iris properly, Leona's combat expertise might come in handy. "Hello there, bestie," he said, forcing the last word out with barely concealed discomfort. Leona's ears perked up, her mood visibly brightening as a radiant smile spread across her face. Her golden eyes sparkled with delight. "What did you just say?" "Discover more content at Empire." Before Damon could respond, a maid arrived with a large trolley laden with food, interrupting the moment. Grateful for the distraction, Damon motioned toward the meal. "Let's eat," he said flatly, avoiding her expectant gaze. As they began eating, Damon's thoughts wandered. "I suppose I can use her. although I may have to put up with her whims. Not that I'm not doing that already. Iris, I'm really going all out for you. Damon and Leona both ate with voracious appetites. Leona, because of her beastkin nature, and Damon, due to the insatiable demands of his shadow. The dining hall was filled with the rhythmic clatter of cutlery and the occasional satisfied hum from Leona, who couldn't stop sneaking glances at Damon. He, however, remained focused on his plate, eating in silence. As he forked another bite of food, Damon furrowed his brow, his senses alerting him to two approaching shadows from the direction of the elevator. It's still early. Why are they awake? The elevator doors opened to reveal Evangeline and Sylvia, who quickly made their way over. Without so much as asking for permission, Evangeline seated herself at the table, clearly having learned from previous encounters with Damon. Sylvia followed, offering a warm smile as she settled into her chair. "Good morning. You two seem inseparable as always," Sylvia remarked, her gaze flitting between Damon and Leona. Damon didn't look up as he responded curtly. "I could say the same about the both of you." Evangeline smirked, nodding toward a maid who added more food to the table. "Hello, Damon. I'm glad to see that 2 days in the infirmary didn't dampen your honest disposition." Damon turned his sharp gaze toward her. "I hate mincing words. Just say I'm a jerk like you really think. No need to act like a noble lady." Sylvia chuckled softly, shaking her head. "You really don't change, do you? I suppose that's fine." Evangeline sighed, leaning back in her chair, while Damon picked up his teacup and brought it to his lips. "I'm not even going to ask why you're sitting here," he muttered. Evangeline replied smoothly. "Actually, this time it's because we wanted to check on you. Leona told us you woke up, and by the time we got there, you're gone." Sylvia set down her fork, her expression firm. "The least you could have done was tell Leona you were leaving. That was insensitive, especially after she spent 2 days by your side." Evangeline nodded in agreement. Her mood was rock bottom. Damon glanced sideways at Leona, who was stuffing her face with food, her demeanor completely carefree. "Her mood seems fine to me." Evangeline turned to Leona for an explanation. Leona gulped down her food and chased it with a glass of juice, sighing contentedly. We made up. We're besties, after all," she said with a cheerful grin. Sylvia and Evangeline both turned to Damon with incredulous looks. He tilted his head defensively. "What?" Sylvia shook her head, a sly smile on her lips. "I underestimated you. Someone's a smooth operator." Evangeline's sun-marked eyes narrowed as she smiled. "I half expected him to say he didn't care. I suppose he really does see her as a friend. Looks like he's finally dropped the lone wolf act." Damon opened his mouth to retort, but before he could, another voice cut through the conversation. "The wretch just wants her money, and he's willing to play nice for a while. It's plain for all to see." The male voice drew everyone's attention. Sylvia smiled as Xander Ravenscroft approached the table. "Hello, Xander. It's nice to see you finally decided to join us." Xander took a seat right next to Damon, his piercing blue eyes carrying a disdainful scowl. "Of course. As long as you ladies are around him, I will be here as well." Turning to Damon, Xander's tone sharpened. Damon, who had been about to make a sarcastic comment, froze. His eyes widened slightly beneath his blindfold. This was the first time since arriving at the Academy that Xander Ravenscroft had ever addressed him by name or even looked at him with any semblance of acknowledgement. Normally, Xander wouldn't even spare him a glance, referring to him as commoner or insect if he spoke to him at all. Yet Damon masked his surprise quickly, his voice cold as he responded. "Xander." The girls stopped eating, their attention fixed on the two boys seated next to each other. They half expected another heated argument to erupt, one that might culminate in a duel. However, to their surprise, neither spoke a word. Damon kept his focus on his plate, deciding to avoid unnecessary conflict. If Xander was willing to behave, he would do the same for now. "I'll save the trouble for another day." Damon's feelings toward Xander Ravenscroft hadn't softened. He still didn't like him. Yet, he couldn't deny that Xander was different from Marcus and his gang. Unlike them, Xander had never physically or verbally attacked him. In fact, if Marcus and the others tried to torment Damon in front of Xander, he would stop them, At first, Damon had assumed Xander's actions were purely out of self-interest, perhaps to maintain control over his followers. But the truth was far simpler. Xander Ravenscroft was a lion surrounded by jackals who borrowed his name to assert dominance. Xander hadn't recruited them, nor did he encourage their behavior. They had gravitated to him because of his noble lineage and natural charisma. But I'm still going to make life difficult for him, Damon thought, a smirk tugging at his lips. Consider it repayment for cleaning up your pack of jackals. His resolve to eliminate Marcus's group remained firm. Breakfast passed uneventfully, the quiet interrupted only by the gradual arrival of other students who filled the dining hall. When Damon finished eating, he stood, prompting Leona to follow immediately. This surprised the others, who hesitated before rising to join them. As the group moved toward the main hall that led out of the dormitory, Damon's senses picked up another familiar shadow moving toward the dining area. Discover Stories with Empire. A young man with blue hair and tired, bloodshot blue eyes entered. His usually immaculate appearance was disheveled, with dark circles under his eyes betraying his sleepless nights. Marcus. The boy's face lit up briefly when he spotted Xander, but his expression froze the moment his eyes landed on Damon. His entire body stiffened, his eyes widening in unmistakable fear. His hands trembled, and it was as if he were staring at a monster. Xander noticed Marcus's state and quickly approached, placing a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "Marcus, are you okay? You're staring off again. I know the deaths of Lark and Isaac are still bothering you, but you need to know that I'm here for you." The words seemed to snap Marcus out of his daze, though he continued to shoot fearful glances at Damon, as if expecting him to pounce. Damon observed the exchange with confusion. Why was Marcus, the same boy who had always sought to bully him, suddenly so terrified? Whatever the reason, Damon intended to find out. It was a risk, but he decided it was worth it. Xander guided Marcus to a nearby chair, speaking in soothing tones. Damon tilted his head slightly, signaling his shadow to follow Marcus and uncover the truth. The shadow moved fluidly, attaching itself to Marcus's own shadow without anyone noticing. At least, no one but Sylvia. Her eyes widened as she glanced at Damon. Well, where did his shadow? She hadn't noticed when his shadow moved, but she noted its sudden absence. Damon suppressed a smirk, maintaining his composure. He needed to be cautious. His shadow couldn't stray beyond a 2-kilometer range without draining his energy. Moreover, he had to ensure no one else noticed its absence. The sun hung high in the sky, its rays filtering through the classroom windows. Damon, however, avoided the light, seated comfortably in a dark corner at the back. His head drooped slightly as drowsiness weighed on him, though his fingers toyed with a small notepad Sylvia had given him. The notepad contained summaries of books on beast taming. With meticulous instructions Sylvia had crafted for training the raven she'd practically forced him to adopt. He sighed, recalling how she'd strong-armed him into taking the bird. Something brushed against his foot, snapping him from his thoughts. Glancing down, he spotted Croft, the raven, dragging a rolled-up piece of paper in its beak. Damon leaned down, retrieved the paper, and rewarded Croft with a piece of meat. The raven eagerly snatched it and devoured it in no time. Unrolling the paper, Damon noticed it was another letter from Sylvia. He glanced toward the front of the class, where Sylvia was seated beside Evangeline. She caught his eye and nodded subtly. The letter itself held no meaningful content. It was just part of an ongoing training exercise. Sylvia had been teaching Croft how to deliver messages, and they'd been practicing since morning, even during classes. Initially, the group had been seated together, passing pens from one side of the table to the other to test the raven's intelligence. Croft had performed admirably, impressing them with its near-human wit. After lunch at the cafeteria, their group split up to escalate the training. This time, the goal was for Croft to deliver letters discreetly without disturbing the professor. That's why Sylvia and Evangeline weren't seated near Damon anymore. The only ones beside him now were Leona and, surprisingly, Xander. Damon tried to focus on Sylvia's notepad, committing its contents to memory. Yet his attention kept drifting to Marcus Fayjoy, who sat alone in a distant corner, muttering under his breath. Normally, Damon wouldn't have been able to make out the words, but he had taken the liberty of attaching his shadow to Marcus. This allowed him to hear and see everything as though he were sitting beside him. What he discovered at first left him pale, but soon a cunning smile crept onto his face. Marcus was paranoid, terrified, even. The boy had convinced himself that Damon was some kind of monster from beyond the barrier, a dark creature from the evil forest masquerading as Damon Grey. He couldn't be more wrong, Damon thought, suppressing a chuckle. That's fine, though. I'll just feed his madness. His smile widened as an idea formed. Good thing I bought some attracts. I can use it to drive him over the edge. Even better, I'll use my arrows made with cursed or to fray his mind slowly. Damon leaned back, his smile fading into a look of resolve. He had made peace with the idea of killing if necessary, but now he saw a different path. Why waste effort targeting innocents when scum like Marcus Fayjoy existed? He had an apprentice now, Aetherus. That meant he needed to act like a proper role model, didn't it? With his shadow latched onto Marcus's, Damon had a clear view of the notes Marcus was scribbling. Since morning, he'd been using Sylvia's notepad to practice imitating Marcus's handwriting. Now he could replicate it perfectly, down to the smallest curve and flourish. Damon sighed, closing the notepad. Marcus Fayjoy was the first enemy I made at the Academy. A shame he'll be the last to die after I drive him mad. He called his shadow back. It slipped away from Marcus undetected, returning to Damon's side and giving him a subtle thumbs up as if to say, mission accomplished. A yawn escaped him as he rested his head on the desk. His objectives for the day were complete, and thanks to Croft's unexpected intelligence, he could accelerate his plans. Croft returned from another errand for Sylvia, dropping a letter from its beak before perching on Damon's head. The boy didn't stir. He'd already fallen asleep. Leona glanced over, noticing Damon's head slumped on the desk. His blindfold obscured his eyes, so it took her a moment to realize he was asleep. She didn't wake him, though. Instead, she simply smiled and let him rest. The professor, a tall woman with flowing green hair, paused her explanation as her sharp eyes settled on Damon's unmoving figure in the corner of the classroom. Her brows furrowed in irritation. "Can someone tell me how the city of Madawaska was destroyed?" she asked, her tone laced with impatience. A few hands shot up, Sylvia's among them. She had undoubtedly read extensively on the subject, but the professor's gaze swept past them, her green hair falling over her shoulder as she pointed toward the back of the room. "You there in the back. Tell me." Damon didn't stir. He remained slouched in his seat, fast asleep. Leona's eyes flickered toward him, her lips pressing into a thin line. Without hesitation, she jabbed her elbow into his ribs. The sharp pain jolted him awake. "Ouch," Damon muttered groggily, his blindfold still covering his eyes. The shadows, which served as an extension of his senses, quickly refocused on the classroom. Leona leaned closer, whispering urgently. Damon tilted his head, catching her words the second time. With a resigned sigh, he stood, brushing his hair back casually. "The city of Madawaska in the Holy Empire, right?" His voice carried an edge of confidence. "You haven't covered that yet." Professor Emeralda's emerald eyes narrowed, her lips curling into a slight smirk. "And how would you know that if you weren't paying attention?" Damon returned her gaze with a calm smile. She was clearly trying to humiliate him, but unfortunately for her, he was prepared. This wasn't like his first days at the Academy when Marcus had tricked him into studying the wrong material. "The answer is fire," Damon said, his voice steady. The city was destroyed by fire. Emeralda's smirk remained, though her curiosity was piqued. "And how, exactly, was it destroyed by fire?" Damon straightened, brushing his hair back with a practiced motion. "It was burned to ashes by the flames of the dragon Ashergon. 35 million people perished, and the Holy Empire deployed its army to repel the dragon." The professor's expression faltered for a moment before she nodded. "Very well, then." But she wasn't done yet. "What is the base herb for healing potions, excluding verdant leaves and flowers?" she asked, her voice dripping with challenge. Damon's smile grew sharper. He recognized the trap. Verdant leaves and flowers were the most common ingredients, and she was fishing for an alternative to catch him off guard. The base herb, if not verdant leaves, would be morena, he said confidently. Or you could use Hermes vitale grass, Milana stems. There are a few others as well. Shall I name them? Professor Emeralda blinked, clearly taken aback by his knowledge. That is correct, she stammered. You may sit down. Damon sat with a satisfied smirk, his confidence undented. But his composure was short-lived. The classroom door swung open, and a familiar figure entered. A red-haired woman with piercing green eyes scanned the room until her gaze landed squarely on Damon. Her cold smile sent a shiver down his spine. She approached Professor Emeralda, whispering something in her ear before turning to address the class. Damon Grey, she called out, her voice ringing with authority. Come with me. You must answer for your crimes against the Academy. Damon's face paled, his heartbeat quickening. Crimes? What crimes? But before panic could take hold, his skill, remorseless, activated, washing over him with a wave of calm. His mind sharpened, analyzing every possible scenario. Each path led to ruin, save for one. With a steady breath, he stood, his expression neutral as he prepared to face whatever awaited him. The class buzzed with whispers as Lilith Astronova, the student council president, spoke in her commanding tone. What crimes did he commit? Someone murmured. I knew that commoner was suspicious from day one. Another scoffed, their voice dripping with disdain. What do you expect from trash like him? That guy always gives his commoners a bad name. Came a spiteful remark. I hope he pays for all his crimes, another added venomously. Damon remained silent, his face a carefully crafted mask of neutrality. He knew better than to speak now. Anything he said could risk revealing more than Lilith already knew. Whatever she's found, it has to be just suspicion. I'll deny. He thought, his mind racing. He was confident she didn't have any real evidence. He had been careful, painstakingly so. No incriminating traces, no witnesses, not even a hint of suspicion pointing toward him. With remorseless, activated again, its calming influence settling over him like a blanket. It forced him to keep his composure, to calculate rather than react. Next to him, Leona's golden eyes glared fiercely at Lilith, her cat-like ears twitching with agitation. Damon sensed the change in her posture, her readiness to pounce. The sentiment stirred something in him. She'd really jumped to my defense, he thought, touched by her loyalty. Still, he knew better. Going against Lilith, someone in the third-class advancement, was suicide. Lilith's sharp green eyes bore into him, cold and unyielding. I won't repeat myself, she said, her voice cutting through the room like a blade. Confess your crimes, and I'll at least get you a plea deal. Damon clenched his jaw, his lips pressing into a thin line. I don't know what you're talking about, student council president, he said evenly. I haven't committed a single crime. Aren't you just accusing an innocent man? Her glare intensified, her piercing green eyes making him feel as though ice was crawling down his spine. Yet she didn't unleash her aura. She didn't need to. I'm giving you a chance, she said coolly. But if you won't take it, so be it. She stepped forward, and in the blink of an eye, she vanished. No ripple of space, no visible distortion. It was as though the distance between them simply ceased to exist. She reappeared inches from Damon's face, her presence overwhelming. Leona was on her feet instantly, ready to defend him, but Lilith didn't give her the chance. With a flick of her fingers, she teleported Leona across the room and pinned her to the floor with glowing magic chains. The difference in their power was undeniable. Don't interfere, Lilith said, her tone icy. Damon remained composed, though his mind whirred. His eyes darted across the room, taking in the reactions of his classmates. Sylvia and Evangeline in the front row looked confused. Xander, sitting nearby, was trying to piece everything together. And Marcus looked almost relieved. To him, Damon being taken away was salvation, the removal of the object of his fears. Lilith turned back to Damon, leaning close to his ear. Her voice dropped to a whisper. Come with me. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. Her lips curled into a cold smile. Though I'd prefer the hard way. Try running again. I dare you. Damon returned her smile with a polite one of his own. I don't know what this is about, but I'm innocent. I have nothing to hide and no reason to run. Lilith's smile didn't falter. In that case, follow me and answer for your crimes. He nodded, standing without protest, and began walking toward the door. Wait! Xander's voice rang out as he rose from his seat. What did he do? Lilith turned, her glare freezing him in place. Mind your business, she snapped. Xander paled, sinking back into his seat as Damon walked out of the room with Lilith. Before they reached the door, Evangeline and Sylvia blocked their path. Can we at least know what crimes he's being accused of? Evangeline demanded, her voice firm. Lilith didn't bother answering, brushing past her without a word. Sylvia opened her mouth to speak, but Damon shook his head, cutting her off. It's fine, Sylvia, he said softly. I didn't do anything. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding. Sylvia bit her lip, hesitating before nodding reluctantly. Damon couldn't help but feel a flicker of surprise. The fact that they were standing up for him was unexpected, touching even, but it did nothing to change his situation. With that, Lilith led him out of the room, leaving behind a classroom buzzing with speculation and murmurs about what he could have done. Damon followed Lilith Astronova in silence, his mind working tirelessly to analyze every possibility. He could try to escape, but that would only make him look more suspicious. Besides, escaping from someone at her level, a third-class advancement, was nearly impossible. At that level, breaking the sound barrier was as easy as taking a step. Lilith was even worse than most. Her void attribute magic set her apart from the rest. Not space attribute void. The distinction was terrifying, and Damon didn't want to dwell on the implications of it. If she knows what I've done, why does she come alone? She should have brought investigators from the Academy, unless she didn't need to. No, it's not about her needing help. It's about how weak I am compared to her. The thought stung, but it was true. Arresting him was probably an effortless task for her, whether she had evidence or not. He tightened his grip on the notepad in his hand, its edges creasing under the pressure. Of all the crimes I've committed, which one does she have evidence of? Lark's death had been attributed to a monster attack. Isaac was missing but officially declared dead. But Isaac's death wasn't ruled a monster attack. They might suspect me. I had every motive and reason to hate him. The thought made his stomach churn. If they search him now, they'd find him armed to the teeth. Daggers, arrows, and even hidden vials, each item incriminating on its own. For a moment, Damon almost smiled. The absurdity of the situation was hard to ignore. Was this the end of the line? Lilith didn't say a word as they walked, letting him stew in his thoughts. She moved a few steps ahead, her presence commanding yet silent. Damon kept his calm demeanor, his expression serene. In fact, he faintly smiled and shook his head, as though dismissing some private joke. A raven perched on his shoulder, its dark feathers gleaming, but her focus remained squarely on the boy. Most eye-catching was the blindfold over his eyes. Her voice finally broke the silence. What do you find so funny? Damon shook his head, his tone light. Nothing. I just think it's absurd to pull me out of class while I was learning. Lilith's sharp green eyes flicked to him. You were sleeping. It looked that way, Damon replied, unfazed. Lilith stopped walking, turned to face him. Her cold gaze bore into him, sharp enough to make most people falter. You're awfully calm, she said, her tone dripping with suspicion. She let the silence stretch for a moment before speaking again, her words like a dagger. Carmen Vale. Does that name ring a bell, Damon Grey? Damon's calm mask remained intact, but internally his thoughts froze. What does she know? Damon took a measured moment before responding, his voice calm and even. Yes, it does. I believe he is a hunter in Aether's sanctuary. He's particularly well regarded in town. Lilith's green eyes studied him intently, her expression unreadable. Is that so? You met him then? Damon nodded. I have, before I entered the academy. Lilith allowed a faint smile to cross her lips, though it held no warmth. Not recently. Damon shook his head, keeping his tone steady. No, I haven't left the academy since I enrolled here. It's common knowledge that first years aren't allowed in a town. Lilith's smile grew, but there was something sharp in her expression now. Is that so? You never been in town since you got here? Damon shook his head again, adding a faint, self-deprecating chuckle. I'm a failing student. I have to study. How could I possibly have time to go into town? Lilith tilted her head slightly, her gaze unwavering. She couldn't see his eyes beneath the blindfold, but she had to admit he was a masterful liar. He carried himself as if he had nothing to hide, crafting a perfect facade of innocence. But Lilith knew better. She remembered chasing him through the streets of Aether not long ago, with Leona Veilfire in tow. To her frustration, the two had eluded her. She let out a quiet sigh, her expression neutral once more. I see. Let's go then. Without waiting for a reply, Lilith turned and resumed walking, her posture regal and composed. Damon followed silently, his mind continuing to turn over every possible scenario. If she had proof, she hadn't shown it yet. She's fishing for something, Damon thought. I just need to keep playing along. He followed Lilith down the wide corridor until they reached a set of imposing double doors. With a firm push, she opened them, revealing a bustling office filled with members of the student council. Papers were being shuffled, filed, and stamped with practiced efficiency, the sound of work blending into a symphony of productivity. Damon's eyes darted to the scene briefly, noting the meticulous order, but he didn't have time to dwell on it. Lilith walked with purpose, ignoring the council members as she led him to the end of the hall. She opened another door, revealing a spacious and neatly organized office. The room exuded authority. A large desk occupied the far end, its surface immaculate save for a few neatly stacked papers. A pair of guest sofas surrounded a small coffee table in the center, and another table near the window bore an assortment of carefully arranged documents. Lilith strode to the desk and sat down, her piercing gaze fixed on Damon as he entered. She didn't mince words. I've been lenient with you, Damon. I gave you a chance to come clean. I even offered you a plea deal. And in case you're wondering, I do have evidence of your crimes. Damon stood still, his expression calm, refusing to react. He needed to get under her skin. I need to do something abrupt and unexpected, but what? Lilith rose from her seat, her eyes sharp as a blade. Damon Grey, you know Carmen Vale is dead. Damon nodded slowly. I do. Lilith's gaze narrowed, her voice colder now. How would you know that if you claimed never to leave the academy? Damon tilted his head, feigning confusion. With all due respect, President, I have a pager. A friend called me and told me. Lilith's lips curled into a faint smile, but her eyes gleamed with suspicion. All I hear are excuses. Confess, and I'll go easy on you. I might even show consideration. Damon's tone remained steady. I don't know what you're talking about. Lilith chuckled, her amusement carrying a dangerous edge. I'm talking about your little crime in the forest. Damon remained impassive under the blindfold, though his thoughts churned. The crime in the forest? There were multiple possibilities. Carmen Vale's murder, Lark Bonner's death. Which one had she discovered? She's trying to corner me. He shook his head. Doesn't ring a bell. I don't know what you're talking about. Lilith sighed, her eyes studying him intently. He's clever, she thought. When he saw me earlier, he paled, but he managed to stay calm. He's not giving me any ground, and his guard is up. Even if I press, he won't say more than he needs to. Her voice turned icy. Do you take me for a fool? Or am I some kind of joke to you? Damon shook his head, glancing at Lilith with a faint smile. Her beauty was undeniable, even when her gaze was filled with hostility. He couldn't help but think of Evangeline and then Xander who had a crush on her. That should work. No, President, I don't think you're a joke or a fool. I think you're a woman of great character. A radiant flower, a beautiful rose always in bloom. Inwardly, he sneered, though you're full of thorns. Tired of following her rhythm, he decided to shift the dynamic. Acting rigid and defensive was mentally exhausting. Lilith's brow arched. Excuse me. Damon scratched the back of his head, feigning nervousness. It's just, you're really amazing, President. I've always looked up to you. You're kind, beautiful, and always looking out for your juniors. Though in my case, you're just trying to ruin me, you two-faced witch. He gulped dramatically, pretending to hesitate. It's just, I've always loved you. I mean, he trailed off, pretending to stumble over his words. I'm sorry, forgive me. Lilith stared at him, wide-eyed, momentarily thrown off balance. She couldn't tell what had inspired this sudden declaration of love, but it had worked. Once again, Damon had managed to disrupt her composure. There's no point in pressing him further, she thought, frustration mounting. He's just going to act like a lovesick fool to avoid my questions. But that's fine. I'll still uncover the truth about Damon Grey. She sat back down, regaining her composure. That's fine and all, but did you forget why you're here? You're here because of your crimes. Damon nodded, his voice tinged with faux embarrassment. Sorry, I got carried away. But I didn't do anything wrong. Lilith sighed, her patience wearing thin. Figures. He's really playing the part of the lovesick fool. This man has no shame, toying with the heart of a maiden. He's more deplorable than I thought, and he's not letting anything slip. She shook her head. Very well, then. It seems you've forgotten your crime. Let me remind you. She pulled out a form and placed it on the table. Didn't I tell you to fill out paperwork for the Academy equipment you took to the forest to train with? That is considered theft, Damon. You took it without permission and refused to fill out the paperwork even after I gave you grace. I'll have to punish you for that. Damon clenched his fists, his mind racing. This bitch, so that's what this was about. She wanted to put pressure on me, bring up Carmen Vale, and act vague to trick me into confessing to my other crimes. It was all part of her scheme. Relief and dread washed over him simultaneously. One slip up, and it would have been over. This woman is terrifying. She almost ruined me. Lilith kept her sharp gaze on Damon, her expression composed but clearly calculating. Despite his blindfold, which hid his eyes, she could tell he was still on guard, refusing to let his defenses slip for even a moment. She had to admit, his sheer shamelessness in faking a love confession was something she hadn't expected. What gave him the audacity to try such a ridiculous ploy? Lilith suppressed the urge to click her tongue. She had dealt with many suitors, each more polished than the last, but none had been so bold or so insincere. The fact that he didn't mean a word of his flattery was an unexpected sting to her pride. He's just too interesting, she thought with a faint smile, though irritation simmered beneath her calm exterior. Now for your punishment, she said, her tone laced with authority. I was going to let you go if you confessed, but seeing how you didn't, I have no choice but to punish you. Damon maintained his composed expression, though his mind was spinning. Understand, President, although I hope you can be lenient and overlook my negligence. Lilith shook her head, her crimson locks swaying lightly. That's fine. Forgetfulness is a human flaw. After all, I can't blame you for being fallible. Damon offered a polite smile. I'm grateful, although I didn't forget. I just didn't want to meet you again, you snake. Lilith raised 2 fingers, her sharp gaze unwavering. I'll give you 2 options. The first, 1 week of house arrest. Damon's heart sank, though his face remained calm. 1 week of house arrest is as good as a death sentence. My shadow needs to feed, or it'll turn ravenous. After that, I'll start losing health until we both die. He hoped the second option was better. It had to be. Lilith watched him intently, noting the slight tension in his shoulders. The second option is for you to assist me. You'll help with the responsibilities of the student council president. In simpler terms, you'll be doing chores for me. Damon bit the inside of his cheek to suppress a groan. That means I'll have to spend time around this woman. Damn it. House arrest is starting to sound appealing. Lilith caught the flicker of frustration in his otherwise stoic demeanor and smirked. You'll also earn credits for your efforts, she added. It's a chance to make up for your failing grades in the quarter semester evaluation. I understand you only enrolled recently and haven't had time to adjust. The mid-semester evaluation is only a week or 2 away. Damon nodded reluctantly. I see. I understand. Lilith wasn't done. Her smirk deepened as she leaned forward slightly, using his earlier words against him. And this is a good opportunity for you to try wooing me. Isn't that what you said earlier? Her voice was sweet and teasing, but it only put Damon further on edge. She's trying to turn the tables on me. I knew there'd be consequences for that stupid confession. He scratched his head, feigning embarrassment. Actually, President, I'm sorry about that. I was just nervous and blurted out nonsense. Lilith stood abruptly, slamming her hands on the desk. Are you saying you didn't mean it? Are you implying I'm not good enough? That I'm beneath you? Are you insulting the Astronova household? Damon clenched his fist, his jaw tightening. This woman, when did I say any of that? Stop putting words in my mouth. He shook his head quickly. Never. I would never say such a thing. I promise I apologize. Lilith's intense gaze softened into a sly smile. Relax. I was just joking. Damon chuckled nervously, his tone carrying an awkward edge. Oh, you have a unique sense of humor, President. Lilith's smile widened, her gaze steady as she relished his discomfort. Good, she replied smoothly, her voice almost too pleasant. You can get started now. As Damon prepared to turn away, she glanced at him, her voice halting his movements. Oh, one more thing, she added casually, though her eyes gleamed with mischief. I believe I've told you this before, but I'm not sure if you remember. I told you to call me Lilith. Damon's lips curled into a wry smile, though the thought in his mind was far from respectful. I didn't forget. I just don't want to be around you. He cleared his throat, forcing politeness into his tone. Of course, President, Lilith. I am honored. No, I'm not. Just let me go, you witch. Lilith's smile didn't waver. Good. You can get started now. She gestured to a table by the window, piled with documents. Why don't you help me sort those out as a start? Damon nodded, moving toward the table, but Lilith stopped him. Wait, give me your pager number. Damon tilted his head, his brow furrowing. Why would you need that? Don't be silly, she replied with an innocent smile. How can I contact you if I don't have your number? Damon sighed. He couldn't refuse, and even if he tried, she'd insist. Reluctantly, he handed her his pager and exchanged numbers. As he sat down to work, he thought bitterly, what misfortune. He glanced at the arrows in his pouch and paused. Wait, could my bad luck be because I'm carrying cursed, or? No, the arrows are encased in shells anvil-made. As long as the shells cover them, the effects shouldn't spread. Shaking off the thought, he turned his attention to the documents. His task was straightforward, organize them into categories, but the sheer volume was overwhelming. Damon got to work, his movements careful and deliberate as he sorted through the stacks of documents on the table. Across the room, Lilith settled into her own desk, her eyes scanning papers with the precision of someone accustomed to power. The room was quiet for a while, the only sounds the occasional rustle of paper and the faint scratch of a pen. Lilith's gaze flicked up from her work, landing on him with a faint smirk. I hope you can see under that blindfold, she remarked, her tone casual but tinged with curiosity. Damon shook his head slightly, but kept his voice neutral. I can see just fine, thank you. Lilith nodded, her expression unreadable. Would you like some tea? He shook his head again, this time more firmly. I'd rather not trouble you. Her attention returned to her work, and the room fell silent once more. Damon, however, was anything but calm. His mind churned with thoughts as he methodically sorted the documents, considering how he might turn this seemingly insignificant chore into an advantage. After an hour and a half of quiet labor, an idea began to take shape. He remembered the notepad he'd received from Sylvia, a useful tool for crafting plans and misdirections. It might just help him weave a convincing narrative to mislead Lilith while plotting his next steps against a bias. As he reached for another document, his hand froze mid-motion. The title on the page caught his eye. Details and premise for first-year academic mid-semester evaluation. Explore more at Empire. Report by Professor Keel Blackthorn. Damon's breath hitched, but he quickly suppressed any outward reaction. Through his shadow perception, he subtly focused on Lilith, checking for any sign that she had noticed his momentary lapse. She remained engrossed in her work, her pen gliding across the paper with effortless elegance. Did she leave this here on purpose? Damon wondered silently, his mind racing. What's her angle? A sly smile crept onto his lips as he considered the situation. Well, I still have to open it if I want to organize it, don't I? If I accidentally catch a glance at the evaluation details, it can't be helped. He carefully unfolded the document, making sure to appear nonchalant, though his senses were sharp and his focus unwavering. This could be a rare opportunity to gain insight into the Academy's plans, if he played it right. As he worked, he couldn't shake the feeling of being a fly caught in a spider's web. Damon stealthily perused the document while Lilith appeared engrossed in her work. His eyes scanned the pages carefully, and he had to consciously suppress the urge to gasp as the contents unraveled before him. The plan for the mid-semester evaluation was unsettling in its simplicity. The Academy intended to expand the barrier that protected its grounds, pushing it deeper into the forest. This expansion would temporarily drive the monsters in that area further into the evil forest, creating a buffer zone. As he read further, the document listed the catalog of monsters inhabiting the outskirts of the evil forest. Damon's chest tightened with every name: wendigos, great spiders, dire wolves, iron honey badgers, and other murderous creatures he wouldn't dare encounter. Thank the goddess they aren't making first years fight these things, he thought grimly. Even with a full party, we'd die in droves. It became glaringly clear why this area was infamously called the Evil Forest. Since the monsters would be displaced temporarily, the evaluation itself wouldn't involve direct combat with them. Instead, Damon focused on the details. The first years were tasked with gathering a limited number of points scattered throughout the designated zone. However, the twist was cruel. Points could be stolen by other students within the time limit. It's going to be bloody, Damon concluded, his mind already calculating how this evaluation would devolve into chaos. He scanned for any additional details. The draft, while comprehensive, was still pending approval. A few signatures, including the headmaster's, were missing, suggesting there was room for revisions. Once he memorized the important parts, Damon carefully closed the document and resumed organizing the files, his expression neutral despite the storm in his mind. His thoughts turned toward strategy. If the evaluation zone was accessible before the barrier expansion, he could scout it to gain an edge. The monsters might be driven out, but the flora itself could still pose significant risks. Pulling out his notepad, Damon began scribbling ideas, tearing off pieces to keep in his pocket. Half an hour passed before he finished organizing the documents. With time on his side, he decided to work on a backup plan, one that involved misdirection. He started writing a letter in Marcus's handwriting, crafting it carefully. If executed correctly, it could serve as a distraction or shift focus away from him. Lilith, meanwhile, leaned on her desk, her left hand covering her eyes. Her posture was uncharacteristic of the ever-composed student council president. Damon's gaze lingered on her. She's tired, probably forgot I was here, he speculated. But then, something didn't sit right. Why cover her left eye? His unease deepened as he glanced at the notepad, holding his forged message, which he intended to accidentally let fall from his pocket for her to discover. Shifting his focus, Damon extended his shadow perception to probe the room. At first, he found nothing, the shadows undisturbed. Yet, the nagging feeling persisted. He scanned again, this time narrowing his focus to the wall beside him. And there it was. A green eye stared through an invisible portal, its gaze fixed on him. Damon suppressed the urge to react, keeping his face impassive while his mind worked frantically. Keeping his cool, Damon leaned slightly back in his chair, his mind racing. She created a portal in her palm and was watching through it the entire time. The thought sent a chill down his spine. He'd encountered unconventional magic users before, but this was on another level. What a convoluted spell. Who even thinks of using magic like this? For a brief moment, Damon fought the overwhelming urge to lock eyes with the green or peering through the invisible portal. But he resisted, keeping his expression calm, his hands busy with the notepad. She thinks she's clever, but she just made things easier for me. There was no longer a need to stage the bait by letting her discover it on her own. If Lilith had already spied on his notepad, all he had to do was play along, and let her believe she had the upper hand. She must have seen what I wrote. Damon shifted his strategy. Mimicking Marcus's handwriting, he penned a forged letter, but this one wasn't addressed to Tobias. Instead, it appeared to be from the deceased Isaac, targeting another member of Marcus's group, Rain Ambridge. The letter outlined a clandestine meeting at a secluded location, complete with a specific date and time. The brilliance of his plan lay in its simplicity. He wasn't planning to send the letter or act on it. It was bait, carefully designed for Lilith to intercept. And now, knowing she'd peaked prematurely, Damon could double down on the ruse. Glancing at her briefly, Damon tore the page from his notepad, folding the pieces and slipping them into his pocket. Rising from his chair, he addressed her. Lilith, I'm done here. Is there anything else, or may I leave? I've already missed most of my classes. Lilith raised her head, offering a thin smile that hinted at a smug satisfaction. Of course. Why not? I'll call for you if I need anything. Damon nodded politely, Croft flying onto his shoulder as he turned toward the door. Just as his hand reached the handle, Lilith's voice stopped him. You shouldn't keep trash in your pocket. Why don't you throw it away? Her words were casual, but her gaze was sharp as she gestured toward a small bin by the door, already half filled with crumpled papers. Read New Adventures at Empire. Damon froze, pretending to be nervous, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. She must think she's got me. He swallowed hard, shaking his head with a feigned stammer. Yes. Lilith, sure. I'll throw it out when I leave. Lilith tilted her head, her smile deepening. Why not throw it here? Biting his lip, Damon hesitated. I just didn't want to fill your bin with my trash. It's all the same to me. Throw it away now. Her stern tone left no room for negotiation, and Damon felt the pressure mounting. Yes, ma'am. He stepped toward the bin, turning his back to her. Reaching into his pocket, he produced the torn pieces of paper. But instead of throwing them away, he slyly ripped a fresh page from his notepad, tearing it noisily before tossing it into the bin. Meanwhile, he clenched the original bait tightly in his hand. Lilith, of course, was watching. From behind her desk, and through the portal eye perched in the ceiling, she observed his every move. She smiled faintly, her expression triumphant. He thinks he's clever, but I've already seen the contents. Damon didn't linger. As soon as the paper hit the bin, he exited the office, briskly navigating past the bustling student council officers and into the hallway. A sly grin crept onto his face. She thinks she's won, but once again, she's fallen for my trap. Hats off to shadow perception, always one step ahead. I win this round, Lilith, and to think I got you with another bait and switch. As soon as Damon stepped out of the range of the student council office, the remorseless skill deactivated. The moment it did, the blood rushed back to his head, his heart pounding in his chest. Fear and tension crashed over him like a wave, reminding him of just how close he had come to disaster. That was way too close. One mistake, and I'd have been finished. Thank the goddess. He placed a trembling hand over his chest, trying to steady his breathing. The memory of everything he had done and said in Lilith's office replayed in his mind, and when he recalled the fake love confession, his ears turned red with embarrassment. I can't believe I said something so ridiculous. So embarrassing. He glanced down at his shadow, which was animatedly shaking its head in mock disapproval while giving him a thumbs up. The gesture made it clear it didn't approve of his methods, but it still supported him. Croft, perched silently on his shoulder, broke the quiet. Caw, caw. Evil, evil. Damon reached into his jacket and pulled out a piece of dried meat, holding it up to the raven. Here, your reward for keeping quiet. Stay silent, and you'll get more. Croft snatched the meat eagerly, its beak snapping shut as it focused on its treat. Damon rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Classes are still ongoing, and with the limited time I have, there's only one thing left to do. The date I said in the false letter is 3 days from now, which means I need to take out Tobias tomorrow. Lilith will expect me to move in 3 days, but she'll never anticipate an earlier strike on a completely different target. A grin spread across his face as the plan solidified in his mind. That's why killing Tobias is the most optimum and unexpected move. His shadow writhed erratically, growing and shifting in response to the surge of killing intent emanating from him. Reaching into his uniform jacket, Damon felt the cold, smooth edges of the hollow arrows tipped with crushed ore. The late afternoon sun cast a warm glow, though it wouldn't be long before it dipped below the horizon. I need to sneak into Marcus's dorm room. Damon had done his fair share of malicious deeds in the past, burning someone's skin with flay powder hidden in their clothes, for instance. But what he was planning now felt darker, more sinister. He intended to use the cursed or to drive Marcus mad, leaving him entirely consumed by the sinister effects of exposure. A fitting payback. He adjusted his pace, heading toward the war halls, his mind racing with preparations. To avoid suspicion, he'd have to sneak in unnoticed. If the headmaid saw him returning while classes were still in session, her questions would complicate things. As he walked, the setting sun painted long shadows across the courtyard. Damon's perception flickered, picking up on the shifting forms around him. He shrank and expanded his shadow perception at will, testing its limits and growing more accustomed to its peculiar mechanics. With a deep sigh, he steadied his nerves. The plan was in motion, and he couldn't afford to falter. Damon couldn't help but reflect on his relationship with Marcus as he approached the war halls. His mind wandered back to the day he submitted the golden ticket to the academy and officially enrolled. That day felt like a lifetime ago. He had arrived dressed in cheap, patched commoner clothes, lovingly sewn by his sister before her illness took hold. Marcus had been one of the first to see him before he put on the academy's pristine uniform. Damon remembered how out of place he had felt. He hadn't joined the academy at the start of the semester like everyone else. Instead, he came in a few weeks after the entrance exams, just before the quarter semester evaluation. By then, the students had already formed their cliques, and Damon felt like a strange, unwanted transfer student. His golden ticket had made the professors ecstatic. They believed they were about to mold the next legend. Damon shook his head bitterly. Boy, did I let them down at that quarter semester evaluation. Mana level 30, huh? He sighed, lamenting his low mana. Before the disastrous evaluation, his first day in class had already set the tone for what was to come. The professor had asked the students to share the semester scheme of work with him. Naturally, Marcus had volunteered. Enjoy new adventures from Empire. Even back then, Damon didn't trust anyone, but Marcus had blindsided him. Never in his wildest dreams did he imagine Marcus would hand him the outline for the second-year students. And like a fool, I went and read up on all the second-year materials, Damon muttered under his breath, shaking his head at his own carelessness. When the exam day arrived, Damon had been completely unprepared. It was like preparing a boat to climb a mountain. He had been ready to sail the seas, but instead, he was confronted by an insurmountable peak. Unsurprisingly, he failed the theoretical exams. After that, it was a landslide of failures. He failed at mana control. He failed the obstacle course. He failed at dueling. He failed at non-attribute magic. He failed at magic combat. He failed again and again. Failure became a constant companion, and resentment festered in his heart. To make things worse, Marcus and his group ganged up on him, adding insult to injury. Damon had held so much poison in his heart during those days. The golden ticket that had once made him popular and admired now became a source of mockery. His spectacular fall from grace was a spectacle for others to enjoy, and thus, Damon earned the humiliating title, the Academy's weakest, the shame of the Academy. But no matter how hard things got, Damon never bowed his head to them. He never submitted. He endured the ridicule and humiliation with clenched fists, waiting for the evaluation results. Though he already knew he had failed, he still had to see the rankings with his own eyes. Taking a deep breath, Damon muttered to himself, "Well, I can't blame Marcus for all of it. Just the theoretical part. The practical exams were all me. I just sucked." He glanced at his shadow, its movements erratic as if mirroring his turbulent emotions. "But I'll change that this mid-semester evaluation. I swear it. I'll show them all." With those words fueling his resolve, Damon finally arrived at his destination after his reflective walk down memory lane. The war halls were mostly empty, save for the maids and the terrifying head maid, Matilda. Her mere presence was enough to make most students hesitate to linger. Damon took a deep breath, steeling himself. The next step of his plan awaited. The war halls, as usual, stood pristine, a testament to the wealth and power of its inhabitants. Lavish decor adorned every corner, the kind of luxury only afforded to the best and wealthiest students. These halls were not merely a place to reside. They symbolized the prestige and influence of their occupants. The students of the war halls were both powerful and influential, and such individuals required someone capable of managing their whims and excesses. That's where the head maid came in. She didn't just oversee the upkeep of the dormitory. She maintained order with an iron will. Even the most arrogant nobility dared not defy her authority. Perhaps because she's a noble herself, Damon thought, his lips curling into a small smirk. The head maid ensured that everyone in the war halls received equal treatment. Despite his status as a commoner, Damon had always been treated no differently than the rest. Her fairness was undeniable. Under her care, every student was equal, regardless of birth. And that was precisely why Damon had never crossed her. She wasn't someone you trifled with lightly. Nothing happens in the war halls without her knowing, he mused, recalling the rumors whispered among the students. Today, however, he planned to test that theory. Crossing the grand double doors, Damon entered the war halls, his steps light yet deliberate. The grand entrance led to a sprawling staircase that curved upward in a show of opulence. The halls were eerily quiet, save for the distant shuffle of maids. Their presence didn't concern him. His target was someone else entirely. Ascending the stairs to the second floor, Damon navigated the corridors with precision, his shadow perception expanding and contracting as he moved. The bright, clean halls were lined with extravagant decorations, paintings, vases, and sculptures that probably cost more than an average person's annual income. He briefly considered how much he could make selling one of these treasures on the black market, but dismissed the idea. Too much trouble. Stopping in front of a door, he spread his shadow perception across the area, scanning for any signs of movement. The coast was clear. The door itself, however, posed a problem. Doors in the war halls were state-of-the-art, outfitted with magical security measures imported from the magic continent. They required an authorized fingerprint, a pager, a personal key, or one of the maid's key cards to unlock. He considered stealing a key card from a maid, but decided against it. The cards left records, and their absence would raise alarms. That's just going to draw on the head maid, he muttered. That left him with one other option. Dangerous? Yes, but necessary. Damon made his way up to the next floor and stopped in front of another door. Unlike Marcus's, this one opened without resistance. After all, it was his own room. Damon approached the window of his room and unlatched it quietly, taking in the cool air of the evening. He spread his shadow perception across the surroundings, carefully checking for any signs of movement. The outside remained silent. No maids, no head maid, and no lingering students to interrupt his plan. "Croft, stay here," he commanded softly. The raven on his shoulder fluttered to his pillow, tilting its head as if it understood. Damon reached for the mechanism strapped to his wrist, the omnidirectional gear. He secured it to the window frame and released the thin wires, lowering himself silently to the floor below. The sun's position worked in his favor, casting the area in deep shadows. Luck was on his side today. Marcus's room was directly beneath his. The window was locked, but for someone with a history like Damon's, a former street rat skilled in theft, it was a minor inconvenience. Pulling out his dagger, he slipped the blade between the frame and lock, coaxing it open with practiced ease. The window slid soundlessly, and Damon stepped into the room, pulling the omnidirectional gear back to his wrist with a sharp zip. "Damn, this thing works like a charm," he muttered, smirking. Closing the window behind him, Damon moved to the bed. He wasn't here to steal. He had other plans. The maids had done an immaculate job. As always, the bed was perfectly made, not a crease in sight. Damon nodded in approval before glancing at a shadow. Keep an eye out, he murmured. His fingers prodded the mattress and pillow, searching for the spot where Marcus most often laid his head. Once he found it, Damon lifted the luxurious king-sized bed with deliberate care. Reaching into his jacket, he retrieved a handful of hollow arrows. Removing the shells that covered the cursed or tips, he carefully placed them along the bed frame in a precise, orderly manner. The cursed or was dangerous. Prolonged exposure could wreak havoc on Marcus's mana flow and mental state. But Damon didn't care. This was payback. After arranging the arrows, he retrieved the shells, slipping them back into his jacket. Lowering the mattress, he took his time smoothing it out to look as undisturbed as before. Just as he was about to finish, his shadow darted toward him, alerting him to approaching danger. Damn it! He cursed under his breath, clicking his tongue. A maid was heading straight for the room, and her steps had already reached the door. With no time to spare, Damon slid under the bed, pressing himself flat against the floor. The door creaked open, and a young blonde maid stepped inside, carrying an empty basket marked with a number. Laundry pickup, Damon realized grimly. His heart sank as he remembered the hollow arrows still nestled in the bed frame. The cursed or's subtly influence gnawing at his thoughts, amplifying his panic. He felt like a fool for putting himself in such a precarious position. The maid moved toward the bed. Something is wrong. Damon's breath caught in his throat. He could see her polished black shoes and the hem of her pristine white apron. This bed hasn't been made properly, she muttered. Was I careless? Damon's blood ran cold as she adjusted the bedding. The cursed arrows were just inches above him, separated only by a thin piece of wood. The effects weren't strong because it usually took time. He did not want to be here any longer than he had to. The maid sighed contentedly. There, much better. She turned away and disappeared into the bathroom, the sound of the door clicking shut echoing in the room. Damon didn't waste a second. He rolled out from under the bed, sweat dripping down his forehead, and bolted for the door. Opening it gently, he slipped out, taking care not to make a sound. Once outside, he walked briskly down the hallway, his senses focused on the maid's presence behind him. Just as he rounded a corner, he collided with something soft, the impact sending him sprawling to the floor. Ouch! What the hell? Damon's words trailed off as he looked up, his face paling instantly. Head maid Matilda. Damon was really starting to wonder if the cursed or on the hollow arrow tips he carried in his jacket was affecting his luck. Otherwise, how could he explain such a streak of misfortune? He'd been so focused on his shadow perception tracking the maid in Marcus's room that he'd neglected his immediate surroundings, an oversight that had led him straight into the person he least wanted to encounter. My brain can only process so much information at once, he thought bitterly as he stumbled back, looking up to meet the piercing amber eyes of the head maid. Her expression was composed, as always, exuding the dignified authority she carried like a second skin. Damon's heart sank. Well, hello there, Miss Matilda. He greeted hastily, brushing himself off. Apologies, I didn't see you there. He tried to sidestep her and make a quick escape, but her calm, commanding voice halted him. Hold on a moment, Damon. What are you doing in the dorms while your peers are still in class? Crap. Exactly what I was trying to avoid. Damon bit his lip, forcing a smile as he turned to face her. I was in class, he lied smoothly, but my pet raven flew towards the dorms. I came to get him and was just about to head back. Matilda's cold, imperious gaze studied him for a long moment before she gave a curt nod. And where is this pet of yours now? Damon's mind raced. He couldn't very well tell her Croft was sitting comfortably in his dorm after he'd snuck into Marcus's room to plant cursed, or I think it flew to the upper floors. I was about to go check there, he said, trying to sound as earnest as possible. Matilda nodded, though her expression remained unreadable. It seems you've had some trouble with the student council, she remarked. How did she know? Damon gave a half shrug. Yes, but I've worked it out, ma'am. Her sharp eyes lingered on him before she gestured towards the elevator. Well, shall we? Damon blinked in surprise. Is she trying to help me? Or is this some kind of interrogation? Reluctantly, he followed her into the elevator. As they ascended, Matilda broke the silence. How are you feeling? Has your body recovered from your duel with Xander? Damon hesitated, caught off guard by the unexpected question. Then he remembered that Matilda was impartial to all the students under her care. Perhaps this was just part of her duty. I'm fine, he replied cautiously. The healers did a good job. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the elevator doors. While I understand the recklessness of youth and the fear of losing, she said, her tone stern, you shouldn't throw your life away so carelessly. If you die, that's when you're truly defeated. As long as you're alive, you can always make a comeback. Damon blinked, stunned as she turned her sharp glare on him. You and Xander were reckless and foolish. No duel or competition is worth putting your lives in mortal danger, she continued, her voice a blend of scorn and concern. Damon didn't know what to say. The last person to scold him for being reckless was his late mother, and Matilda's words struck a nerve he didn't realize was still raw. By the time they reached his dorm, her stern lecture had left him dazed. She waited as he retrieved Croft, the raven fluttering to his shoulder with a huff, before she dismissed him with a firm order to return to class. As Damon walked back, his mind reeled. Did she really chew me out like that? For my own good? He wondered, shaking his head. He remembered how she'd asked about his well-being before scolding him, a small but significant detail. He chuckled dryly. What, does she think she's my mother or something? Damon arrived at class, only to find Professor Kale standing at the front of the room. He let out a sigh. My luck really is getting worse, he thought grimly. Pushing the door open, he attempted to slip in quietly, but the moment he stepped inside, the first person who noticed him raised their voice. He came back. The criminal. The declaration sparked a ripple of murmurs across the room. They actually let him go? He actually came back? Someone murmured. They really let him go? Must have pulled some strings. I wonder what crime he committed. It must be serious if the student council president got involved. Damon clenched his jaw, ignoring the judgmental stares and whispers. He was about to find a seat when Leona, who had been sitting anxiously with Sylvia, Evangeline, and Xander, jumped up and ran to him. You came back. I was so worried, she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. Damon froze, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden embrace. Awkwardly, he patted her shoulder and gently pushed her away. I'm fine. It wasn't a crime, just a small misunderstanding, he said with a forced smile. Leona nodded, relief evident on her face. I'm glad you're okay. I thought she might have held a grudge because you fooled her once. Sylvia and Evangeline joined them, with Xander trailing behind, a frown etched on his face. I'm glad it was nothing, Evangeline said, exhaling in relief. Sylvia crossed her arms. It was bound to be nothing. I knew that. Evangeline raised a skeptical eyebrow. Did you? Because I distinctly remember you worrying he might be sent to the Inquisition, even though I told you that was a ridiculous assumption. Sylvia chuckled nervously. Yes, well, I suppose you were right. She couldn't admit to Evangeline that her fear had stemmed from spotting Damon without his shadow earlier, but at least it had all turned out fine. Xander's sneer broke through the conversation. I think the real mistake was sending this wretch back. Damon sighed, shaking his head. Despite Xander's harsh words, he hadn't forgotten that Xander had actually stood up for him when it mattered. Can I sit down now? Damon said with a tired look. Lilith, that slave driver, made me do a mountain of paperwork. I need a break. As he walked to his seat, Marcus, sitting nearby, immediately grabbed his belongings and moved to a seat further away, his face pale with fear. Damon smirked coldly, his thoughts sharp. Run, Marcus. Where will you run? It's too late for you. Once seated, his classmates bombarded him with questions, and for the first time, Damon found himself answering them generously. Professor Kale didn't even glance their way, his focus on the board as though the commotion existed in another realm. But when he finally turned around, his sharp gaze silenced the room instantly. Class ended soon after, and as Damon prepared to leave, exhausted from the day, his pager vibrated. Pulling it out, he sighed heavily at the name displayed. I knew she wasn't done with me, he thought grimly. Leona peeked over his shoulder and read the name aloud. Lilith Astronova? What does she want now? Damon sighed again, shrugging. Who knows? He answered the call, and her voice came through, firm and commanding. Meet me by the academy gates. Now. Damon hung up, running a hand through his hair. My luck has definitely gotten worse. The sun had long set, casting a cool, bluish glow over the academy grounds. Damon tried everything he could to buy more time. Excuses, delays, even pretending to be busy. But Lilith Astronova wasn't someone who took no for an answer. And so, he found himself reluctantly making his way to the academy's gates. The gates of the academy were nothing short of magnificent. A towering metallic structure crafted from rods of unknown origin. They glistened faintly under the moonlight. Damon had no clue what material they were made from, but their presence alone was intimidating. It was said that Aether the Sage, the legendary founder of the academy, had created the gates himself. He must have been quite the artist, Damon thought wryly, staring up at the intricate patterns etched into the metal. Then again, what else could one expect from a man who had supposedly reached the 7th class advancement? Aether's power was said to have been so immense that it dwarfed the entire world. Stories claimed he had fought the Dominator, Ashcroft, in a battle so intense that he had vanished without a trace. Damon sighed, using the myths as a way to distract himself. But can I really afford to be distracted, considering who I'm meeting? Lilith Astronova. The mere thought of her sent a shiver down his spine. If there was anyone who could rattle him, it was her. She was clever, cunning, and persistent. Damon knew she likely had schemes and plots ready to ensnare him. But if today's earlier encounter proved anything, it was that she didn't actually have any concrete evidence against him. She's operating on instinct, he realized, and yet that didn't comfort him. If anything, it made her more dangerous. Intuition like hers was rare and often unervingly accurate. He suspected she had an agenda beyond whatever the Academy's rules dictated, but speculating on her motives wasn't going to help him now. Damon shook his head. It was better to stay sharp and avoid getting caught in her web. As he neared the gates, he reminded himself of another inconvenient truth. He couldn't actually leave the Academy grounds. As a first-year student, his movements were restricted, and the only times he had managed to leave were through sneaky, less than legitimate methods. Why does she want to meet here, of all places, he wondered. He stopped just short of the imposing gates, their cold metal almost seeming to hum with power. Now he just had to wait. The question was, for what? Damon scanned the area and immediately spotted Lilith Astronova seated by the grand marble fountain near the Academy gates. The fountain's shimmering water reflected the warm glow of the nearby lamps, casting a soft radiance over her. Her striking red hair seemed to glow like embers, accentuating her already breathtaking beauty. Most men would have been entranced by the sight, but Damon remained unfazed. To him, Lilith might as well have been a siren luring sailors to their doom. He approached her cautiously, his steps deliberate. "President," he greeted curtly. She didn't even glance his way, her attention seemingly fixed on the cascading water of the fountain. Damon sighed, bracing himself for the ordeal ahead. "Lilith, you wanted to see me," he said, this time more direct. She finally turned her head, her gaze locking onto his. Her voice was calm, but carried an edge of authority. "Yes, I've been waiting for you. I can't believe you try to get out of this. I'm going to need your assistance tonight." Damon frowned slightly, nodding. "I'll be happy to help." Lilith chuckled softly, clearly amused. "You don't look very happy right now." Damon met her gaze with a deadpan expression. "I'm absolutely beaming with joy." Her lips curled into a sly smile as she reached into her jacket, pulling out a brooch adorned with the Academy insignia. She tossed it to him casually. He caught it, examining it with mild suspicion. "What's this supposed to be?" "It's your pass," she explained. "With that, you'll have permission to follow me into town. Keep it on you in case we get separated." Damon's unease deepened at the mention of leaving the Academy grounds. He had planned to meet Iris Vale today, and this unexpected task was throwing a wrench in his plans. "You wanted to go to Aether's sanctuary?" he asked cautiously. Lilith nodded. "Yes. Think of it as a learning experience. You mentioned you haven't been to town since enrolling here." Damon remained silent, his expression carefully neutral. Her words carried a subtle challenge, as if daring him to lie. She smiled knowingly, adding, "Unless, of course, you've been sneaking out and have been less than truthful about it." Damon shook his head quickly. "I will be happy to accompany you, Lilith." Satisfied, she stood, her commanding presence making it clear she expected him to follow. "Excellent. Let's get moving. While we're there, you'll help with patrol. If you spot any first years out of bounds, apprehend them or contact me or another council member for backup." He nodded reluctantly. "I don't have the contact numbers of the others." Lilith gestured to the brooch in his hand. The brooch contains a sound stone. Sound stones connect only to others from the same source. They were common before pagers, though flawed since each stone works with only its pair and disintegrates after a while. Damon nodded absently, filing the information away. As she spoke, an idea began forming in the back of his mind, but he kept his face impassive. The two of them reached the gates, where they underwent a brief security check. The guards barely glanced at Lilith. It was a mere formality, but she insisted on the process since Damon, a first year, was accompanying her. Once cleared, they boarded a waiting carriage. Damon's eyes widened slightly as he took in the luxurious interior. The polished wood, soft leather seats, and faintly glowing comfort spells were a stark contrast to the rickety wooden carts he was accustomed to. "TCH," he muttered under his breath. Lilith, catching the sound, raised an eyebrow. "Is something the matter? Is the carriage not to your liking?" "I apologize. These are of lower quality. Next time, I'll ensure a better arrangement." Damon shot her a sideways glance, his thoughts racing. Low quality? What could be better than this? An airship? He couldn't help but think of the famed airships of Voldrin, said to glide between the floating continents. Of course, he'd never even seen one in person, let alone boarded one. Maybe teleportation gates are better, he mused. But those were far too expensive, especially for someone like him. Lilith, mistaking his silence for dissatisfaction, seemed to take his reaction as a personal critique. Damon sighed inwardly. Damn nobles and their deep pockets. The carriage ride was smooth and uneventful. It wasn't long before they arrived at Aether's sanctuary. "Hey, how long do you intend to make us do this? We've been walking all over town for 2 hours now," Damon grumbled, his irritation breaking through his usually guarded tone. Lilith turned to him with a teasing smile. "I'm a delicate lady, but you don't see me complaining about taking a little walk. Or is it that you just hate my company?" Damon regarded her impassively. "Actually, I do," he thought, but refrained from saying aloud. Instead, he replied dryly, "I wouldn't compare someone who's reached the third-class advancement to someone like me, who's barely scraping by." Lilith chuckled softly. She found his sarcasm amusing, though Damon's patience was wearing thin. The walking itself wasn't the issue. It was the constant mental strain of staying on guard around her. They had arrived in Aether's sanctuary 2 hours ago, and in that time, Lilith had patrolled the town diligently, helping anyone who appeared to be in need. Damon, however, had been roped into assisting her with various menial tasks, from carrying supplies to repairing a vendor's stall. The townspeople seemed to think highly of her. Even adventurers, who were typically rough around the edges, treated her with a mix of respect and caution. It wasn't surprising. Few would dare to cross someone at the third-class advancement. Damon, however, found it all incredibly tiresome. Helping others for no personal gain felt like a pointless waste of energy. "Why are we even doing this?" he finally asked, unable to hide his exasperation. Lilith shook her head with a bemused expression. "I suppose you wouldn't understand. We're being good Samaritans." Damon frowned, unconvinced. He decided to be blunt. "I hate to be rude, but you don't strike me as the type of woman who would do something that has no tangible benefit to her." Lilith sighed, her smile turning faintly exasperated. "You don't seem to hate being rude, but fine. Think of it this way. Building a good reputation is a form of power. We call that influence." Damon nodded slowly, though his skepticism was evident. "I see. That's under the assumption that the so-called public doesn't stab you in the back. The only person you can truly trust is yourself." Lilith's smile returned, a hint of amusement in her eyes. "You're quite the pessimist, but you're not wrong. Still, I never said I trusted them. I'm only building potentially useful connections. Humans are not as one-dimensional as you think. Try to keep an open mind. Damon sighed, his voice laced with reluctant agreement. I see. I'll keep that in mind. Lilith noticed his tone and tilted her head slightly. You don't seem to believe me, she remarked, her voice light yet probing. Damon remained silent, refusing to engage further. They continued walking, eventually entering a quieter part of town, a secluded neighborhood with wide streets and modest homes. The air was still, and the absence of bustling activity made Damon uneasy. Where are we going exactly? He asked, scanning their surroundings. You won't find any first years in this boring part of town. Lilith nodded. We're not looking for first years. I'm here to meet someone. Damon's brows furrowed, but he said nothing. As they approached their destination, a sense of unease began to creep over him. The quiet atmosphere and the subtle shift in Lilith's demeanor made him instinctively more cautious. Who exactly is she meeting here? He wondered, his guard rising as they neared their destination. The house was all too familiar. Damon had been there just the night before. This was the residence of the late Carmen Vale. Damon said nothing, keeping his expression impassive, his blindfold securely in place. As they approached the house, Lilith stepped into the yard and knocked on the front door. Damon, meanwhile, extended his shadow perception, sensing the faint presence of a young girl moving toward them from inside. His fists clenched instinctively. He was on guard, wondering what schemes Lilith might have in store for him. The door opened, revealing Iris. Her eyes briefly flicked toward Damon before she quickly turned her attention to Lilith, her lips parting as though to speak. Damon gave a subtle shake of his head, stopping her in her tracks. Iris closed her mouth and turned fully to Lilith. Hello. How may I help you? Student Council President? She asked politely, her tone steady, though Damon could tell her control over her expression wasn't as strong as it needed to be. Lilith smiled at Iris's reaction to seeing Damon. Though Lilith didn't look at him, she didn't need to. Iris's subtle glances gave her away. May we come in? Iris nodded, already familiar with Lilith. She stepped aside to let them in. Damon gritted his teeth, keeping his thoughts carefully guarded. I was planning to meet Iris myself, but this... Did she know I came here yesterday? Or was this just another trap? Iris glanced at him from the corner of her eye before speaking again. Allow me to make you some tea. Lilith inclined her head graciously. Thank you. They moved to the living room. Lilith chose to sit beside Damon on the sofa, her presence immediately making him uncomfortable. Without a word, Damon stood and moved to another chair, putting a deliberate distance between them. Lilith tilted her head at his reaction, her lips quirking into a teasing smile. What's this? Afraid of catching my cooties? Damon had expected such a remark. No, not at all. He gestured to Croft. The raven perched silently on his shoulder. It's just that Croft can get aggressive if strangers sit too close. The raven, hearing the blatant lie, let out an indignant caw. Caw! Liar! Liar! Damon swiftly smacked the bird with just enough force to silence it. Croft quickly changed its tune. Caw! Evil! Lilith laughed, clearly amused by the entire exchange. It seems your familiar doesn't quite agree with you. Damon sighed, his tone laced with feigned regret. I should have eaten him when I had the chance. Lilith chuckled. I highly doubt a raven would taste good. Before Damon could respond, Iris returned, carrying a tray. She set it down gently before serving them tea. Damon poured himself a cup, his movements refined, almost automatic, as though he were used to such rituals. Experience tales at Empire. Lilith observed him briefly, noting his manners but choosing not to comment. Instead, she turned her attention to Iris. I apologize for not coming earlier. Iris shook her head, stealing quick glances at Damon as she responded. It's fine. Lilith nodded solemnly. I didn't want to come until I had at least a lead on your father's death. At the mention of her father, Iris bit her lip, her face contorting with pain. Damon kept his expression neutral as he sipped his tea, though he could feel the tension in the room rising. Lilith continued, her tone steady but serious. I'm sorry, Iris, but I haven't made much progress. In fact, I can't help you at all. Damon felt a wave of relief wash over him. Of course, she has nothing on his death, he thought, almost letting out a sigh. But then Lilith's gaze shifted to him, and his relief evaporated. But while I can't tell you who or what killed your father, she said, pausing for dramatic effect, I know someone who can. She gestured toward Damon. He can. Damon, who had just started to relax, froze. The words hung in the air, registering slowly. His brows shot up, and before he could fully react, he choked on his tea, the hot liquid burning his throat as he sputtered in disbelief.